Hi guys, and welcome to Last Light Radio channel. Tonight we step into a dim American dawn where the air feels still, but not peaceful, and where millions of lives are being pressed into narrower and narrower spaces. What does it feel like to wake in a world that wants your labour, fears your voice, counts your footsteps, and still dares to call that order? What is it like when freedom exists nearby, yet remains guarded by paper, money, skin, and law? So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And while you are here, comment with your location and your local time. Now, dim the lights, and you find yourself standing in the year 1830, where morning comes softly over fields, lanes, wharves, and alleys. But the softness is deceptive. Roosters call from farmyards, damp wood smoke drifts low, leather creaks, bare floorboards chill your feet. Somewhere a wagon rattles, somewhere a bell rings, somewhere a mother is already awake, listening for danger before sunrise has fully shown its face. You enter this world through the senses first, because that is how power often arrives. It comes in the crack of a door before daylight. It comes in the smell of ash and wet earth. It comes in the rustle of someone rising quickly because they must, not because they choose. In 1830, for black Americans, the nation is not simply divided between slavery and freedom, as if those were neat boxes on a shelf. It is a landscape of pressure. In the South, slavery dominates daily life with brutal clarity. In the North, free black communities exist, grow, worship, work, and build families, yet their freedoms remain painfully thin. You are watched in one place by masters, patrols, and lawmen. You are watched in another by employers, mobs, kidnappers, and officials who can suddenly decide your liberty needs examining. The year itself matters. The United States is still young enough to call itself experimental, and old enough to have settled into cruel habits. Cotton has transformed the Southern economy. Eli Whitney's cotton gin did not reduce slavery, as some once imagined clever machines might do. It made slave labour even more profitable in the Cotton South, feeding mills across the Atlantic and enriching planters at home. So when you walk through Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, or the Carolinas in your mind, you're walking through a system that is not fading. It is expanding, hardening, and teaching itself to be efficient. That is the dreadful talent of such a system. It learns. You feel this tightening not only on plantations, but in towns and crossroads. Rules multiply, permissions matter. White anxiety grows louder. Enslaved people can be hired out, marched south, sold inland, punished publicly, or kept under domestic supervision so constant it feels like a second atmosphere. Free black people, even those born free, often need proof of status because a claim to freedom can be challenged by any white stranger with a suspicious expression and enough local approval. Imagine carrying your own existence like a fragile receipt. Lose it, and someone might decide you have disappeared into another category, and that category governs nearly everything: where you sleep, whom you can legally marry, whether your child can remain with you, whether your body belongs to you in any meaningful sense. The law in 1830 is not simply a distant book on a shelf. It is a hand at the shoulder. It is a question at the roadside. It is a curfew bell, a pass, a permit, a tax, a threat. You can hear it in the clipped voices of clerks and sheriffs. You can hear it in the smaller silences too, those pauses when people choose not to say what they know. If you are enslaved, your day begins early, often before the sky has shifted from black to blue. The cold can bite in winter. Mosquitoes rise in warmer months. The smell of unwashed wool, damp straw, smoke, and soil clings to the morning. Some people wake in cabins with dirt floors or rough boards, crowded with family or with others placed together by circumstance and sale. You stretch aching limbs. The body keeps score even when records do not. Work has already shaped your hands, your back, your pace, your sleep. There may be a small fire if fuel is available. There may be cornmeal, a bit of pork, molasses, or nothing yet. Hunger is an old companion. So is hurry. The work depends on place. In tobacco country, the rhythm differs from rice country, and both differ from urban slavery in Charleston, New Orleans, Richmond, or Baltimore. On cotton plantations, labour is relentless, tied to seasons but never truly resting. In cities, enslaved men may haul goods, build structures, serve in workshops, or drive carts through muddy streets. Enslaved women may cook, wash, nurse children, spin, sew, carry water, scrub floors, and still be expected to serve at any hour. The categories overlap because control does not care for neat job descriptions. If more is demanded, more is taken, and yet daily life is never only labour, that would be too simple, and history is seldom simple. People talk in low voices while carrying water. Someone hums while stirring a pot. Children play with bits of string, sticks, shells, scraps of cloth, or carved toys made from almost nothing. A woman braids hair with careful fingers. A man mends a tool in a sliver of evening light. Someone knows how to make a dish taste richer than the ingredients deserve. Someone else knows which leaves ease a fever. These are not small things. They are pieces of personhood, stubbornly preserved. Historians still argue over how much room for negotiation existed inside different enslaved communities, because surviving records lean heavily toward the voices of enslavers, travellers, and officials. The archive loves power. It saves receipts, ledgers, punishments, and inventories. It is much worse at preserving the private joke, the hand squeeze in passing, the warning whispered at dusk. Still, enough remains to show that black life in 1830 contained skill, wit, affection, planning, faith, and memory, even under severe control. To say this is not to soften oppression. It is to refuse the lie that oppression erased humanity. You also notice how white Americans in 1830 obsess over control while pretending they are preserving order. That is the public language. Order, stability, property, safety, respectability. Such words are polished until they gleam. Beneath them sit fear and profit, fear of revolt, fear of mobility, fear of literacy, fear that black people might gather, speak, travel, preach, trade, and think without white permission. Profit from crops, bodies, rents, fines, sales, and inherited wealth. It is not elegant. It is greed in a formal coat. Only 1 year earlier, in 1829, David Walker published his fiery appeal, calling for resistance and condemning slavery with terrifying clarity. Southern authorities reacted with alarm, tightening surveillance of black communities and restricting the circulation of anti-slavery writing. So in 1830 even paper feels dangerous. A pamphlet can panic a legislature, a sermon can trouble a sheriff. A literate black sailor arriving at port may be viewed less like a worker and more like a lit match near dry hay. There is something almost absurd about how frightened powerful men can be of words. Almost. Then you remember what words can do. You move now through a southern town at first light. Mud clings to wagon wheels. Horses snort into the chill. Shopkeepers lift shutters. Market women arrange produce. Fish smell sharp on wooden tables. Iron rims scrape stone. White men in hats speak of prices and weather and elections. Black workers move through the same streets under very different conditions. Some are enslaved and sent on errands with a pass. Some are hired out and expected to bring back wages to an owner. Some are free and must still behave with exhausting caution. A wrong glance can be interpreted as insolence. A delay can become suspicion. A conversation can be called gathering. A gathering can be called conspiracy. You see how quickly ordinary motion can be renamed into a threat, and naming matters. A person described as likely runaway becomes vulnerable. A child listed in an estate inventory becomes a line of value. A woman called breeder in a trader's crude language becomes reduced in official eyes to profit and reproduction. This is one of the bleakest truths of the period. Bureaucracy and brutality cooperate very well. Ink can wound from a distance. There is also the domestic slave trade, one of the great engines of terror in this era. Even if you live far from the newer cotton frontier, you can still feel its pull. Traders buy enslaved people from the Upper South and move them south and west, often tearing apart families that had survived together for years. The soundscape of this trade includes chains, wagon harnesses, muffled crying, shouted orders, and sometimes a silence more haunting than noise. New Orleans, in particular, becomes one of the largest slave markets in the nation. Prices rise and fall with age, skill, sex, health, and market demand. As though this were merely commerce and not a national habit of moral collapse dressed up as accounting, a quirky detail survives from some accounts of the period. Certain traders and sellers took care to make enslaved people appear healthier before sale by improving diet briefly, oiling skin, or masking signs of illness and exhaustion. Human beings were prepared like deceptive merchandise. There is a horrible vanity in that, a little theatre of polish before violence. The country could be grotesquely tidy when money was involved. If you travel north in your imagination, the scenery changes, but the danger does not vanish. Philadelphia, New York, Boston, and other cities contain free black communities with churches, schools, benevolent societies, craftsmen, labourers, domestic workers, sailors, and entrepreneurs. There is movement here and aspiration. There are newspapers and meeting halls. There are people who own homes, run businesses, and organise mutual aid. The smell of bread, tar, river water, horse manure, lamp oil, and laundry soap fills the air, yet freedom remains hemmed in by discrimination so routine it can masquerade as weather. Employers refuse jobs, white workers resent competition, schools segregate or exclude, voting rights are restricted in many places, public insults arrive cheaply, violence can arrive too. Kidnapping is one of the darkest shadows over free black life. Free black children and adults in northern states can be seized, especially near ports or border regions, and sold into slavery. Imagine living with that knowledge tucked under every errand. You leave home and understand that liberty may depend not only on law, but on who notices, who believes you, and who profits from pretending not to. Parents warn children carefully. Communities create networks of warning and support. Caution becomes a civic virtue because the state cannot be trusted to provide safety equally. You notice, too, how churches become central spaces in black life, both north and south, though under very different conditions. In some places, worship is supervised by white authorities who prefer sermons about obedience. In others, independent black congregations provide leadership, dignity, education, and emotional shelter. You can hear feet on wooden floors, voices rising in prayer, a rustle of fans, the deep rhythm of a hymn carried by people who know how to make sorrow musical without making it smaller. Religious life offers comfort, but it also offers organisation. This is one reason white officials sometimes fear it. A praying community can also be a thinking community. There are scholarly debates about the precise balance between African cultural retention and adaptation among black Americans by 1830, especially across regions. Some customs, songs, foodways, naming patterns, spiritual practices, and forms of storytelling clearly carry African roots, transformed by American conditions. Other traditions blend influences in ways that resist easy labelling. You feel this uncertainty as texture rather than problem. Culture is not static. It travels, survives, hides, improvises. It remembers through rhythm, recipe, gesture, and tone, in households, on roads, beside docks, within quarters, in kitchens, in lofts, and behind stables. Information moves, news of prices, news of births, news of deaths, news of a harsh overseer, news of a kinder one, though kindness under ownership is a grim and limited category, news of a preacher, news of a patrol, news of someone sold south, news of a possible escape route, news of legislation, news of anti-slavery voices, news that a neighbouring county has grown stricter. A world under surveillance becomes very skilled at whispering. By night, the emotional temperature changes. Work may pause, though anxiety does not. Crickets take over where wheels and shouted commands leave off. Smoke thins upward from small fires. Cloth dries near heat. Tired bodies settle. Skin feels the day's sweat drying to salt. Feet throb. Hands sting. The stars look indifferent, which feels rude, honestly. But night also allows forms of life the daytime tries to flatten. Stories are told, songs are remembered. Courting happens when possible. Parents teach caution without draining wonder entirely from childhood. An elder might speak of places known only through memory and report, names carried over water and time. The future remains uncertain, but the simple act of imagining one matters. So this is where you are in 1830, in a nation growing, boasting, legislating, buying and praying, while also narrowing the daily breathing room of black Americans. Control is tightening through law, custom, commerce, and fear. Freedom exists, but precariously. Enslavement expands, especially with Cotton's rise. Families love one another under threat. Communities gather under suspicion. Work fills the daylight. Watchfulness fills the dark. And through it all, black Americans continue to make meaning, protect one another, and insist, sometimes quietly and sometimes with astonishing boldness, that they are more than any inventory, pass, insult, or statute could ever contain. The country may try to measure them as labour, danger, or property. Yet even in this hard year, beneath the smoke, mud, prayer, sweat, and dawn chill, you can feel an unbroken human presence refusing to become what the system says it is. Morning in 1830 can begin with a simple, frightening question. Do you have the paper before your hands are fully warm, before breakfast is settled, before the dust of the road has risen around your shoes? The answer may matter more than your name. A folded certificate, a travel pass, a note from an employer, a seal, a signature, a date written in fading ink. These things can stand between one kind of danger and another. They cannot guarantee safety. Still, they are expected to perform little miracles. You feel the vulnerability of paper at once. It grows soft in damp weather. It tears at the corners. It can be lost in a hurried pocket. It can be stolen. It can be called false by someone who simply wishes it to be false. In a country that claims to admire law, the law often behaves like a lantern carried by a very moody person. It lights some faces kindly. It swings away from others. For black Americans in 1830, documents become both shield and trap. They prove status, but they also reveal how fragile status really is. If you are a free black person in a southern state, your freedom may depend on carrying papers that certify it. That sentence alone feels absurd. Freedom, supposedly natural, and God-given in so much patriotic speech, must be presented on demand like a theatre ticket. A sheriff may ask, a constable may ask, a white stranger with enough confidence may ask. If your accent sounds unfamiliar, if your clothes suggest travel, if you hesitate too long, suspicion can bloom instantly. Suspicion is cheap. Clearing your name is expensive. Even in northern states, where slavery has been abolished or is gradually disappearing, proof of status can still matter. A free black sailor arriving at port may be challenged. A worker moving from one town to another may need references. A person who cannot produce convincing evidence may discover that official sympathy has left the building. Some states and municipalities develop registration systems for free black residents. These systems are presented as order. They function as surveillance. Every requirement sends the same message in a polite little whisper. Your liberty is conditional, inspectable, and not entirely yours. The smell of paper itself can enter the memory of a life. Dry pulp, ink, leather satchel, candle smoke from late-night reading, the faint mildew of a folded certificate kept too long near a roof that leaks. Touch matters here. You smooth a crease with careful fingers. You refold a pass along the same line so it fits inside a pocket sewn shut once and reopened. The document becomes almost bodily, carried close to the skin, warmed by the chest, guarded like medicine. For enslaved people, passes are part of daily control. A note may permit travel from one plantation to another, or from a household into town on a specific errand. These written permissions might include the person's name, destination, purpose, and expected return. It sounds administrative because it is. Oppression loves administration. It likes tidy sentences. If an enslaved man walks along a road after dark, a patrol may stop him and demand a pass. If an enslaved woman carries a basket toward market, someone may inspect her right to be there. Movement itself becomes suspect unless whiteness is signed off on it. You can picture the scene clearly, a lane bordered by pines, the scrape of boots on dry soil, cicadas buzzing so loudly they almost mask the voices. A horse shifts under a mounted patrolman. A lantern throws a weak yellow circle onto the road. Hands are searched. A cap is removed. A folded note is opened. The patrolman reads slowly, lips tightening around the words, enjoying the pause just a bit too much. He checks the date. He studies the face in front of him as though the face might confess to existing improperly. That is the mood of the encounter, not justice, performance. Slave patrols are a central instrument of control across much of the South. They stop, question, search, whip, and intimidate. They break up gatherings. They hunt runaways. They inspect quarters. They operate at night and on roads, in spaces where black mobility is most likely to unsettle white authority. The official reason is public safety. The real function is domination. A patrol announces to every black person within earshot that free movement, privacy, and presumption of innocence are luxuries reserved for others. These patrols vary by region, and historians continue to debate how consistent their activity was across counties and seasons, because records are uneven and local practices differed. In some places, patrols were formal, organised, and routine. In others, they were irregular but still feared. What is not much in doubt is the emotional climate they created. You do not need an officer on every corner when uncertainty itself can do the work. When people never know exactly when a challenge may come, vigilance becomes constant. Passes can also be manipulated from below. Some enslaved people learn to read enough handwriting to understand what a note says. Some forge passes. Some alter dates. Some borrow one another's permits. Here the humble scrap of paper becomes a battlefield of wit. There is a sly intelligence in this world, always adjusting. One surviving tradition suggests that certain enslaved men became so skilled at imitating the rough hand of overseers that local whites grew suspicious of almost any note that looked too neat. Imagine committing fraud with penmanship because the entire system is already a fraud. It has a certain dark elegance. Free black seamen face another layer of trouble. Southern port cities fear the circulation of ideas as much as the movement of people. Black sailors arriving from northern states, the Caribbean, or abroad, are seen by some officials as dangerous carriers of news, anti-slavery sentiment, and rebellious possibility. In places like South Carolina, laws had already been used to jail free black sailors while their ships remained in port. The reasoning was blunt. Black mobility frightened local authorities. A sailor who had seen another world, spoken to other workers, and carried himself with practiced independence, did not fit comfortably inside the fantasies of a slave society. So imagine the harbour. Tar, salt, fish, and rope in the air, masts creaking overhead, water knocking softly against pilings, sailcloth snapping in a stiff breeze. You step off a vessel expecting wages, shore leave, maybe a hot meal, perhaps a few hours of ordinary life. Instead, an official informs you that your very presence is unacceptable. You may be jailed until departure. Your labour is welcome on the ocean, apparently, but your freedom on land causes administrative indigestion. Ports become filters, and black mariners are the particles white authorities most want to catch. Inland, another paper regime shapes life through registration and taxation. In some states, free black residents are required to register with county officials or carry certificates proving lawful residence. Some jurisdictions impose special taxes on free black people, as if liberty itself were a troublesome luxury item. Others restrict migration by requiring bonds from newly arrived free black people, sums of money meant to guarantee good behaviour. A person can be peaceable, hard-working, and devout, yet still be treated by statute as a probable inconvenience. Bureaucracy rarely raises its voice. It simply places another form on the table. The effect on daily life is exhausting. You plan errands around checkpoints, both formal and informal. You think carefully about whom to visit and how late to remain. You ask whether a road is safe after dusk. You wonder which magistrate is harsh, which clerk is careless, which patrol captain is drunk, which town constable enjoys humiliating people. Every practical decision contains a legal calculation. Even clothing can matter. Dress too poorly and you may be taken for enslaved. Dress too well and you may be accused of presumption or theft. There is no perfect costume for navigating suspicion. Children grow up in this atmosphere. They learn not only manners, but document sense, protect the paper, know where it is, do not hand it over carelessly, answer directly, avoid wandering, return before dark. Parents teach these lessons with steady voices, though fear sits just beneath them. A child may not yet grasp the full structure of the law, but the child understands that folded paper in a mother's trunk or father's coat can make adults suddenly serious. The object gathers gravity. This creates a curious emotional contradiction. Paper is powerless by itself. It cannot speak, run, resist, or love. Yet entire households may organize around its preservation. Some people hide documents in Bible covers, sew them into linings, or store them in boxes wrapped against dampness. Others keep copies made by friendly officials or literate neighbours when possible. A free black artisan might know the exact drawer where his certificate rests. A widow may sleep lightly because her dead husband's proof does not automatically protect her son. Law divides families into categories with such cool precision that grief gains paperwork. In courts, written records can both preserve and erase. Manumission papers may testify that a person was legally freed by an owner. Birth records, apprenticeship indentures, tax rolls, church registers, and bills of sale all intersect with black life. Though often on unequal terms, enslaved people appear in documents as property, labour value, or inherited assets. Free black people appear as exceptions to be managed. Rarely do records capture interior life. They tell you that a person was 22, mulatto, able-bodied, appraised at a certain amount. They do not tell you that he hated the smell of stale tobacco, or laughed when nervous, or sang softly while shaving by weak daylight. This is one of the quieter cruelties of the age. People are reduced to notations. A mother becomes a figure in an estate. A carpenter becomes a line in a hiring account. A young woman becomes a certificate of freedom folded and unfolded until the edges fray like fabric. The official archive is full of black presence and yet strangely stingy about black personhood. You feel it in the cold language, height, complexion, scar on left hand, value, tax due, bond posted, ordered to depart. The clerk dips his pen. Human life vanishes into categories. Some free black people answer this pressure by building their own paper trails. Churches keep membership lists. Mutual aid societies record dues. Black schools, where they exist, keep names. Newspapers publish notices and arguments. Community leaders write letters of recommendation or identity. A web of black record-keeping grows, small but meaningful. If the state insists on documents, communities produce counter-documents. Papers that say, in effect, this person belongs among us, is known, is real, and should not be made to disappear by official whim. You can hear the scratch of these pens in back rooms and church vestries. A schoolmaster straightens a stack of names. A minister folds a letter. A society treasurer notes a contribution of a few coins saved with effort. Lamp oil flickers. Outside, wagon wheels hiss through mud. Inside, writing becomes a quiet defence. It is not romantic. It is practical. And that practicality carries dignity. There is a strange little irony in all this. White Americans of the era often congratulate themselves on living in a land of liberty, while requiring mountains of evidence whenever black people attempt to exercise it. The contradiction sits there in broad daylight, wearing polished boots. The nation loves freedom in speeches, less so in the hands of those it has marked for suspicion. That gap between principle and practice is not a crack. It is a canyon. Travel adds further tension. Stagecoach drivers may refuse passengers. Ferrymen may question status. Innkeepers may deny lodging or alert authorities. A black traveller must think like a strategist. Which route has fewer patrols? Which county is known for kidnappers? Where can one find a trustworthy household or church contact? How much food should be carried in case stopping becomes dangerous? The landscape is filled with invisible lines. You cross them at risk. At times, white employers or patrons use papers to extend control beyond immediate supervision. A free black worker may need a reference letter to secure employment, tying his livelihood to white opinion. An enslaved person hired out in town may carry a note explaining the day's task, while wages flow not to the worker but to the owner. Documentation then does more than identify. It channels labour, value, and obedience through approved routes. Paper becomes a leash made of words, and yet people study the system carefully. They learn signatures, seals, and county names. They memorize which forms are commonly accepted. They recognize which official hands write in sprawling loops and which in cramped lines. Knowledge of paperwork becomes a survival skill. Not all literacy is learned in school. Some is learned at the roadside, under pressure. While pretending not to tremble, some is learned by watching one document save a person and another fail. A fringe but fascinating detail comes from stories of hidden compartments in walking sticks, hats, trunks, and wagon panels used to conceal money, letters, or identifying papers. Not every tale can be verified neatly, and some may have grown in the telling, yet they fit the reality of a world where possession of a document could mean security or danger depending on who found it. Objects acquire second lives when freedom is uncertain. A hat is not just a hat. A lining is not just cloth. Toward evening, when the heat lessens and the air smells of river damp or trampled grass, the same question still hangs over the day. Were you challenged? Did anyone ask? Did the paper holder person may return home physically unharmed and still feel worn thin by scrutiny? To be doubted repeatedly is tiring in the bones. To know that your legal standing exists one suspicious glance away from collapse is a peculiar burden. It teaches carefulness, but it also breeds anger, humour, discipline, and mutual dependence. So in 1830, tighter control is not only chains, whips, auctions, and patrol horses, though those are all real enough. It is also the folded pass, the county seal, the certificate of freedom, the bond requirement, the registration book, the night stop on a lonely road, the port official with a key, the clerk who decides whether your name belongs in the ledger and under what heading. Black Americans live among these paper walls every day. Some are visible, some are implied, some can be slipped through with ingenuity, others close hard and fast, but all of them reveal the same uneasy truth. A society unsure of its own justice asks endlessly for proof from the people it wrongs. By the time the sun has properly climbed, work has already taken hold of the day. It is not the gentle sort that gives a person pride and a fair return. It is labour measured by somebody else's appetite, somebody else's clock, somebody else's idea of what a black body should endure without complaint. In 1830 for black Americans, work is rarely just work. It is supervision, it is extraction, it is proof, constantly demanded, that your strength can be turned into profit. You feel it first in the body. Stiff shoulders, a tender palm, the raw rub of coarse cloth against skin not fully healed from yesterday's strain. In the fields, dew wets the hems of trousers and skirts before heat begins its long assault. In kitchens, the first fires of morning lick at iron pots and make the room close and smoky. In stables, hay dust floats through shafts of light. On docks, rope fibres scrape the hands and salt settles into the cracks of the fingers. Every trade has its own atmosphere. Every task leaves a trace. If you are enslaved on a cotton plantation, the rhythm can be punishingly precise. Cotton demands labour across the agricultural cycle, but picking season becomes especially relentless. You move row by row, bending, reaching, dragging a sack that grows heavier against your shoulder. Burrs scratch, sun presses down, sweat runs into the eyes, dust clings to the mouth. The field can look almost peaceful from a distance, neat and pale under a wide sky. Up close, it is monotony sharpened into discipline. Each plant asks the same thing: keep going. The rise of cotton is one of the major facts shaping black life in this era. By 1830, cotton has become central to the southern economy and to the wider Atlantic market. Mills in Britain and the northern United States hunger for the fibre. Planters respond by demanding more acreage, more workers, more output, more control. Expansion into the southwest draws enslaved labourers into newly claimed lands where forests are cleared, cabins thrown up, and routines imposed with startling speed. What looks like national growth on a merchant's ledger feels very different when you're the person forced to clear the stump-filled ground. The sound of that clearing stays with you, axe blows ringing through humid air, branches crashing, men grunting as roots resist, insects whining, mud sucking at shoes. New plantations are not born tidy, they are carved into being. Enslaved workers often do the first brutal labour of making raw land profitable, draining, chopping, burning, planting, fencing. Before there is a gracious house with columns, there are blistered hands and smoke hanging low over cut timber. A great many elegant southern claims to civilization are built on landscapes first made harsh by coerced black labour. In older tobacco regions, work has its own tempo. Tobacco is delicate in some stages and exhausting in others. It must be planted, weeded, cut, cured, packed. The leaves have a thick green smell that clings to clothes and hair. Handling them can leave skin sticky. The barns where tobacco cures hold a dark, heavy odour, almost sweet and almost rotten. It settles in the throat. In rice country, labour is shaped by water. Fields flood. Mud sucks at the ankles. Mosquitoes rise in swarms. The air can feel warm enough to lean on. Knowledge of irrigation, timing, and soil becomes essential, and much of that knowledge sits in the hands of enslaved workers, whether white owners acknowledge it or not. That practical expertise is one of the uncomfortable truths buried inside the slave economy. Black Americans are not merely forced workers, they are skilled agriculturalists, carpenters, coopers, blacksmiths, boatmen, cooks, laundresses, masons, seamstresses, nurses, and drivers. Their knowledge keeps households functioning and businesses moving. Their experience often exceeds that of the men who claim to own them. A planter may issue commands, but he might not know when a field is truly ready, how to repair a broken wheel properly, or how to save a sick child with an herbal remedy learned through generations of observation. Power and competence are not distributed equally. The powerful are simply louder about it. In town, labour can look more varied but no less controlled. Urban slavery in places such as New Orleans, Charleston, Baltimore, and Richmond includes hauling freight, making bricks, loading ships, cleaning houses, preparing meals, tending shops, and hiring out for trades. Streets fill with noise from carts, iron rims, hammers, bells, and shouted instructions. The smell is a layered thing. Horse manure, fish, chimney soot, wet rope, fresh bread, stale beer, sweat, and river water all compete in the same narrow lanes. Enslaved workers move through this dense world under watchful eyes, often expected to appear efficient, obedient, and invisible all at once. Quite a trick, this. Society asks for contradictions and then punishes failure. Hiring out adds another wrinkle. Some enslavers send labourers to work for wages in other households or workshops, collecting the earnings themselves or requiring a fixed amount to be turned over. In theory, this can create a sliver of flexibility. In practice, it often means exploitation by several parties instead of one. A worker may have to please a temporary employer while fearing punishment from the actual owner if money falls short. It is a miserable arrangement of borrowed authority. Yet within it, some people manage to build connections, learn trades, or save small sums. Survival often depends on finding room inside crooked systems without mistaking that room for freedom. For enslaved women, labour is especially layered. Many work in fields, particularly in cotton and tobacco regions. Many also perform domestic labour, cooking, cleaning, spinning, sewing, childcare, washing, and carrying. These duties can begin before sunrise and continue after dark. The smell of lye soap roughens the nose. Hot water reddens the hands. Heavy linens resist wringing. Floors require repeated scrubbing. Children, both black and white, need tending. Meals must appear on time as if they prepared themselves by grace alone. Domestic labour is often described by white households as lighter than field work, which is a charming little fiction told by people who are not the ones standing over hot kettles with swollen feet. The kitchen itself can be a strange centre of life. It is full of demands, but it is also full of knowledge. Enslaved cooks shape the tastes of entire households. They understand timing, preservation, spice, smoke, and scarcity. They stretch ingredients. They improvise. They make use of cuts and scraps others dismiss. Through foodways, African traditions blend with native, European, and local influences into dishes that later generations will praise, without always acknowledging the hands that built them. You smell cornmeal, greens, onions, pork fat, ash, hot iron, and simmering beans. You hear the crackle of fat in a pan. Labour fills the room, but so does creation. Children work too, though the tasks vary by age and place. Some carry water, mind younger children, gather wood, chase livestock from gardens, shell peas, pick worms from plants, or run messages. Childhood is compressed by necessity. Play still exists, because children insist on being children with heroic stubbornness. But work creeps in early. A stick becomes a toy for 10 minutes, then a tool. A game of chase stops when someone calls a name sharply from the yard. The lesson arrives young. Your time is not fully your own. In free black households, labour can bring wages, pride, and modest independence. Yet it remains bounded by discrimination. Many free black men work as sailors, barbers, labourers, porters, draymen, craftsmen, or servants. Many free black women work as laundresses, seamstresses, cooks, domestic servants, street vendors, or caretakers. Even when the labour is paid, white employers often underpay, delay payment, or limit advancement. Certain guilds and professions remain closed. A skilled black carpenter may be trusted to build a fine staircase, but denied equal standing in the trade. A black woman known for excellent laundry may still be addressed as if competence were a surprise every single day. That constant insult has economic consequences. Restricted opportunity means fewer ways to accumulate property, educate children, or weather illness and unemployment. Free black workers often depend on community networks, churches, and mutual aid societies to survive hard periods. In some cities, women selling cakes, fruit, oysters, or small goods on the street help sustain families through ingenious hustle and long hours. Their work fills the urban morning with motion and call, baskets balanced, coins counted, aprons tied tight. They know which corners bring customers and which policemen bring trouble. Commerce becomes a map of social danger. Historians still disagree about the exact degree of task autonomy available on certain plantations, especially where labour systems differed between gang work and task work. In some places, once a specific task was completed, workers might gain limited time for gardening, fishing, mending, or visiting family nearby. In others, labour was driven collectively from dawn to dusk with little flexibility. The differences matter, but none of them soften the central truth. Even the most lenient arrangement sits inside a structure of force. Time that can be taken away is not truly yours. It is borrowed under threat. Supervision takes many forms. There is the overseer on horseback, visible and feared. There is the driver, sometimes an enslaved man placed in the bitter position of managing others under white command. There is the mistress who inspects housework with sharp eyes and sharper remarks. There is the clerk who counts barrels. There is the foreman at the dock. There is the owner who appears unexpectedly, measuring output as if tallying grain. Surveillance does not have to be theatrical to be effective. A glance can carry enough warning for the day. This pressure shapes posture and speech. You learn when to lower the eyes, when to answer quickly, when silence is safer than wit, and when a carefully chosen bit of humour can deflect a tense moment. The social intelligence required to survive under constant scrutiny is immense. People read moods, footsteps, voices, weather, and timing with extraordinary precision. They know which creak of the porch means trouble, which cough in the yard belongs to a kindly elder, which mood in the household means tempers may flare by supper. This is labour too, though no one records it in the account book. Emotional calculation can be as tiring as lifting. There are moments of small resistance woven into work. A tool repaired slowly, a pace subtly adjusted, a broken handle blamed on age, a horse fed with extra care despite orders to spare the grain, a garment stitched with hidden neatness for someone you love, a little food saved, a song altered just enough to carry a message. These acts may seem minor against the scale of the system, yet they matter because they preserve intention. A person forced to labour still seeks places where choice can survive. One quirky detail from the period appears in accounts of skilled enslaved artisans who became quietly famous for particular talents. A blacksmith known for shoeing difficult horses, a cooper whose barrels rarely leaked, a cook whose pastries could impress guests who would never admit the source of their delight. Their reputations might circulate through towns and plantations, sometimes earning better treatment, sometimes merely making them more profitable. Prestige under bondage is a bitter sort of compliment. Still, mastery could become a form of guarded self-respect. It reminded people, and perhaps sometimes reminded them stubbornly, that excellence did not belong to the class claiming superiority. Weather governs everything. In winter, numb fingers fumble with tools before feeling returns in stinging waves. Breath clouds the dawn. Wood smoke clings to wool. In summer, Shirts stick to the back by mid-morning. Gnats gather at the eyes. Thunderheads build in the distance and sometimes burst with theatrical force, sending workers scrambling to protect crops, goods, or laundry. The body works through all of it. Seasons do not cancel demands. They merely change the flavour of discomfort. Evening does not always bring rest. Animals still need tending. Fires need feeding. Clothes need mending. Grain must be ground. Children need washing. Pots must be cleaned. In urban settings, some labour continues after dark under lamps and candles, particularly in inns, taverns, kitchens and transport work. Night wraps the town in shadow, but not in mercy. You hear soft talk from doorways, late footsteps on boards, the occasional clatter of a cart, a baby fussing, somebody coughing through thin walls. Fatigue settles like an extra blanket, only much less comforting. And yet, within this exhausted world, people cultivate pieces of selfhood with stubborn care. A man may straighten his hat before stepping into town, insisting on dignity. A woman may tie her headscarf with elegance after hours of drudgery. A child may sing while carrying kindling. A family may tend a small garden plot at the edge of the day, coaxing beans or greens from the soil for their own table. Such efforts do not cancel oppression, they answer it. They say the person doing this work is more than the work extracted. So what was labour like for black Americans in 1830? It was everywhere. In the fields, on the water, in the house, at the forge, on the road, at the washtub, under the sun, beside the stove, by the cart, near the loom, beneath the gaze of those who believe supervision was their natural right. It was skilled and underpaid, necessary and disrespected, exhausting and closely watched. It built fortunes for others. It sustained households that denied the full humanity of the people sustaining them. But inside the grind, black Americans continued to think, adapt, create, joke, endure, and protect one another where they could. Their labour fed the nation. Their humanity survived its gratitude. Night falls differently when a home cannot promise safety. The light softens. The day noises thin out. A kettle hums faintly. Crickets take over the fields. In town, the last wheels creak over uneven streets, and shutters close one by one. Yet for black Americans in 1830, evening does not always bring relief. It brings closeness, warmth, family, prayer, food if there is food, and a little breath at the edge of the day. But it also brings uncertainty. A house may shelter you from rain, wind, and cold. It may not shelter you from law, ownership, debt, sale, or intrusion. You feel the meaning of the home first through texture, a rough blanket, a packed earth floor, a board wall that lets in drafts through narrow seams, a straw tick that rustles when you shift, the warm shoulder of a child sleeping nearby, the smell of smoke caught in cloth, cornbread cooling on a plate, a bit of onion, salt pork if fortune has been decent, soap, damp wood, human closeness. These things belong to ordinary life. They are humble, but they matter. Home begins not as architecture, but as repetition, memory, and the people who know your face in the dark. For enslaved families, housing varies sharply by region. Wealth of the enslaver, crop, and local custom. On many plantations, cabins stand in rows, sometimes called quarters, built for utility rather than comfort. They may be made of log, plank, brick, or rough board, with simple chimneys, sparse furniture, and little insulation. Some are one room, some hold more than one household, some have loft spaces for sleeping, others barely contain the number of bodies expected to rest there. White visitors occasionally praise such cabins as cheerful or sufficient, which tells you more about white self-congratulation than about the cabins themselves. Inside, however, People make homes as best they can. A stool is repaired again. A quilt is pieced from scraps. A gourd becomes a vessel. A shelf holds treasured objects. A tin cup is polished. Dried herbs hang near the fire. A child keeps a smooth stone. A rag doll. A carved toy. A bit of ribbon. Someone saves a button because it is pretty. Someone else saves a nail because it may be useful. Domestic life in these spaces demands ingenuity. Scarcity trains the eye to see possibility everywhere. This effort matters because the home is one of the few places where enslaved people can claim any measure of inward life, even though that claim is never secure. After labour, families gather if distance and assignment allow. Food is prepared, stories are shared, feet are rubbed, hair is combed and braided, clothes are patched by weak firelight, advice is given in low voices, a child learns manners, caution, and kinship all at once. An older person recalls a song or a saying. Somebody laughs, and the laugh is precious because it is not being sold. Yet the threat presses in from outside and from above. The legal system does not recognize enslaved marriage as fully binding in the way white marriage is recognized. Couples may make solemn vows before their community, before God, before each other. But ownership can still split them apart. Children can be sold away. A husband may live on one plantation and a wife on another, visiting only when permitted. A mother may raise a child while knowing that her authority over that child is always shadowed by the owner's claim. It is difficult to describe the cruelty of loving under contract terms set by someone else. You can imagine a couple in the evening speaking softly once children sleep. One listens for footsteps outside while the other speaks of ordinary things because ordinary things are easier to survive. The roof needs mending. The beans were good this year. The little one has outgrown her shoes. Maybe someone heard of a cousin nearby. Maybe someone was sold from the next place over. Maybe a new overseer is coming. Every domestic conversation carries two tracks at once. One track is family life. The other is danger management. For free black families, the home may offer greater legal stability, but not complete safety. In northern cities, free black households rent rooms, share dwellings, board relatives, and crowd into neighbourhoods where work is accessible and community ties are strong. In southern towns, free black families may own property in some cases, though laws can restrict where they live, how they travel, and what rights they can exercise. Their homes may be modest, neat, hard-working spaces filled with tools, sewing, books, wash lines, trade equipment, and church clothes carefully brushed for Sunday. They are homes built by labour and defended by discipline. Still, a free household exists in a world where white officials, creditors, kidnappers, or hostile neighbours can violate its peace. A knock at the door may be a friend, a customer, a pastor, or trouble-wearing boots. Parents teach children not to open too quickly. Papers are stored carefully. Money is hidden with care. Windows are watched at night. Liberty has a latch on the door, but it sleeps lightly. One important historical fact is that black home life in this period is often sustained by gardens, poultry, fishing, hunting, and informal exchange. On some plantations, enslaved people cultivate small plots in whatever time they can claim, growing vegetables or keeping a few chickens. These additions supplement meagre rations and can sometimes be traded for cloth, tools, tobacco, or a few coins. A patch of greens at the edge of a cabin yard is more than food. It is skill. It is planning. It is a little zone of intention in a landscape organised by force. The sensory world of such a yard is vivid. Earth turned with a hoe, mint crushed underfoot, chickens scratching near the doorway, a bucket knocking gently against a well curb, late light on leaves, wet laundry brushing your arm on a line. In a life constrained by others, these small domestic spaces can feel deeply personal, not free, exactly, but inhabited. The difference matters Historians continue to debate the extent to which enslaved households could form stable family structures under widely varying plantation conditions, because evidence differs by region and by the size of the slaveholding unit. On small farms, people may have lived in closer daily contact with enslavers and in smaller family groupings. On larger plantations, there might be broader community networks but also more rigid labour organisation. What emerges clearly, despite the gaps, is that black families formed enduring bonds whenever possible, even when law and commerce refused to honour those bonds. Stability was often created from below, not granted from above. Women carry an especially heavy domestic burden. After field labour or house service, many still prepare meals, sew, wash, care for children, tend the sick, and maintain emotional steadiness within the household. Their work is both practical and relational. They stretch food, they monitor illness, they preserve customs, they discipline children gently or sharply as needed. They also absorb fear, sometimes without the luxury of displaying it. White households may describe black women as naturally strong, which is often just a convenient excuse for asking more of them. Men, too, navigate complicated roles within homes that the law does not allow them to protect fully. An enslaved father may provide, instruct, repair, comfort, and model dignity while knowing he lacks legal power over his own household. That limitation is not a measure of his love. It is a measure of the system's cruelty. In free black homes, men may still struggle against low wages, exclusion from trades, racial insult, and the constant anxiety of proving themselves respectable in a society eager to deny them that standing. Respectability becomes both shield and burden. Children bring motion and noise into these homes, even where hardship is severe. They chase one another around yards. They fall asleep suddenly. They ask questions adults cannot always answer honestly. They notice more than grown people think. A child knows when a mother has been crying by the fire. A child knows when visitors speak too quietly. A child knows when adults are pretending calm. Yet children also create joy without effort. They sing, invent games, tease siblings, make toys from scraps, and turn a stick, a string, and a hoop into an afternoon's whole kingdom. A curious detail from the era appears in accounts of handcrafted household objects made from astonishingly limited materials. Cornhusk mats, patched quilts, gourd containers, hand-carved stools, brooms made from gathered fibres, and toys shaped from cloth remnants or bits of wood all appear in glimpses of domestic life. These objects may not survive in many museums, but they filled real rooms and passed through real hands. A polished silver service leaves a better archive than a cornhusk doll, which feels unfair but unsurprising. History has always had expensive tastes. Religion often enters the home as well as the church. Family prayers may be spoken at bedside, near the hearth, or over food. A Bible, if one is available and someone can read it, becomes treasured, if reading is restricted or impossible. Scripture and hymn lines may still live in memory and be recited aloud. Spiritual life threads itself through the domestic sphere by voice, rhythm, gesture, and hope. The home becomes a place where theology is not abstract. It is woven into fear, gratitude, birth, sickness, and mourning. Mourning, sadly, is part of home life too. Infants die. Illness spreads. Medical care is uneven, often cruel, or simply absent. A fever in a crowded cabin is frightening. So is a cough that lingers through winter. Black households rely on practical nursing knowledge, herbal remedies, community help, and endurance. Some treatments work, some do not. White doctors may dismiss black suffering or exploit black patients. In this context, the home becomes a place of care under pressure, where tenderness has to do the work that institutions refuse to do well. Privacy is scarce, in quarters. Walls are thin, rooms are crowded, and neighbours hear most things. This can be comforting and difficult at once. Grief is not entirely solitary, neither is argument, nor laughter, nor song. A nearby voice may soothe a restless baby. A nearby quarrel may keep everyone awake. Collective living creates bonds, obligations, and occasional frictions. But it also means that people know who is ill, who is hungry, who has lost someone, who needs help patching a roof before the next rain. Community enters through the walls because the walls cannot keep much out. In urban settings, boarding and shared housing create their own forms of closeness. A seamstress rents a back room. A sailor sleeps under the same roof between voyages. A widow takes in washing and a lodger to make ends meet. Dishes are stacked carefully because there are few. Trunks hold nearly everything of value. Privacy is once again limited, but so is isolation. News moves through stairwells, alleys, backyards, and church porches. The home is not sealed from the neighbourhood, it is part of its pulse. There is also a constant legal vulnerability around ownership and inheritance. A free black family may acquire furniture, tools, clothing, perhaps even a house, yet illness, debt, racist court practices, or discriminatory laws can endanger that fragile security. Enslaved people, of course, face even harsher rules, since the law often refuses to recognize them as legal owners in the fullest sense. Nonetheless, people accumulate and protect possessions because possessions carry use, memory, and self-respect. A shawl is warmth, but also beauty. A chest is storage, but also continuity. A chair repaired 3 times is proof that somebody intended to remain seated in their own life. The atmosphere at bedtime can be strangely mixed: relief, weariness, alertness. The air cools against tired skin. The last embers settle. Someone coughs once, then again. Outside, frogs pulse from low ground. Far away a dog barks. The dark is thick, but not always calm. You wonder whether tomorrow will arrive as expected. You wonder whether a trader's visit, a sheriff's order, a debt, a quarrel among whites, or a change in law might disturb the fragile arrangement under this roof. Many black families in 1830 live with that uncertainty as a daily companion, and still they make homes. That is the remarkable thing, not because hardship is charming, which it is not because oppression teaches noble lessons, which it does not. They make homes because people are makers of home whenever they can be. They season food, they warm water, they save ribbon, they tell stories, they tuck children in, they comfort the sick, they repair benches, they sweep thresholds, they speak blessings over those they love. Even where ownership, racism, and law threaten the household from every side, Black Americans keep building domestic worlds with care and imagination. So a home in 1830 is rarely simple. It may be a cabin, a rented room, a yard, a shared dwelling, a space above a workshop, a corner of a kitchen building, or a narrow house on a crowded street. It may be poor, crowded, drafty, and vulnerable. It may also be beautiful in ways the powerful do not bother to see. Beauty can live in order, in tenderness, in a bowl set aside for a child, in a song hummed while sweeping, in herbs drying by the hearth, in a hand resting lightly on another hand at the end of a hard day. Safety is incomplete. Love is not. When evening gathers people toward worship, the air changes. It becomes softer in one way and more alert in another. Feet slow on paths worn by habit. Doors open carefully. A lantern glows through a crack in the boards. Pine smoke hangs low. Damp earth cools beneath your shoes. Somewhere nearby, a hymn begins so quietly it almost sounds like breath. For Black Americans in 1830, faith is never only a private comfort. It is consolation, language, discipline, memory, and sometimes the safest place available for thoughts too dangerous to speak plainly in daylight. You step into a meeting place and feel at once how much can be carried in a room. It may be a formal church with benches, a pulpit, whitewashed walls, and windows that hold the last of the dusk. It may be a brush arbour made of poles and leafy branches, open to the night air and smelling of sap and crushed grass. It may be a cabin swept clean for gathering, with stools borrowed, candles stuck into holders, and children leaned drowsily against their mothers. The structure matters less than the mood. People arrive carrying the week inside them. Labour, grief, fear, small joys, unanswered prayers. The room takes all of it. In some southern communities, black worship takes place under white supervision. White ministers preach obedience. White church officers monitor attendance. White ears listen for the wrong kind of message. Enslaved people may sit in galleries, at the back, or in separate sections. They are invited into Christian fellowship on terms that protect white authority. This arrangement is presented as spiritual care. Very often it is spiritual management. Slaveholders like religion best when it sounds agreeable, soft, and useful. The Bible, after all, can be used in several voices. Some white ministers emphasize passages about servants obeying masters, offering a polished religious gloss to an economic crime. They preach order, submission, duty. They select scripture as though choosing tools from a tidy shelf. Yet the same Bible contains Moses facing Pharaoh, captives longing for deliverance, and a God who hears the cry of the oppressed. Black listeners do not fail to notice this. One of the remarkable things about religious life in 1830 is how often people hear more than they are officially meant to hear, so even under supervision, meaning travels. A hymn can hold sorrow and defiance together. A prayer can sound humble on the surface while carrying a deeper plea for justice. A preacher may speak of the Israelites crossing troubled waters, and every person in the room knows this is not really only about ancient geography. That is part of the genius of spiritual interpretation in oppressed communities. It works in layers. One meaning for the watcher, another for the weary, sometimes a third for the brave. In independent black churches, especially in northern cities, faith takes on a broader civic life. Congregations organize charity, education, leadership, mutual aid, and debate. They collect offerings for widows, for the sick, for schools, for members in distress. They host meetings, they keep records, they train speakers. A church is not merely where people pray on Sunday. It is one of the strongest institutions black communities possess in Philadelphia, New York, Boston, and other cities. Black churches offer dignity in a society very determined to ration that commodity. You can hear the sound of such a service, shoes scuffing wood floors, a baby fussing, then settling, a deacon clearing his throat, pages turning, a hymn rising without instruments at first, then catching rhythm from hands and feet. Voices weave together, some rough, some sweet, some strong enough to carry the whole room through a difficult line. There is a pulse to it, not hurried, not ornamental, grounded. The song fills the rafters, and for a little while the room seems larger than the building that holds it. Music matters enormously. Black worship traditions in this era carry African rhythms, call and response patterns, emotional range, and communal participation that distinguish them from the more restrained forms favoured by many white congregations. People sing with the body as well as the throat. The music sways, it presses, it answers itself. This is not performance in the modern sense. It is collective feeling organised through sound. Historians still argue over exactly how specific African musical forms survived and changed in different regions. But there is little doubt that black religious music in America draws from older traditions of rhythm, repetition, and communal voice. The song remembers what the archive forgets. In the South, praise meetings may take place at night after the day's labour, especially where formal church life is limited or watched too closely. People gather in quarters, in clearings, or under brush shelters. The darkness offers cover. It also sharpens the senses. Crickets pulse, owls call, pine needles soften footsteps. Breath hangs in cool air. Someone posts a lookout. This is worship. Yes, but also a social technology of survival. The meeting restores people to one another. It reminds them that despair is not the only language available. Some accounts describe hush arbours, secluded places in woods or low areas where enslaved people met away from white surveillance. The stories often include pots turned upside down to muffle sound, wet quilts hung nearby, or songs sung low until trust settled over the gathering. Not every detail can be proven in every case, and some elements may have grown more vivid through retelling, but the basic idea fits the conditions of the time. When public space is controlled, sacred space becomes inventive. People make privacy where none was meant to exist. You can picture the scene. A moon dim behind cloud, leaves whispering overhead, the smell of damp bark and trampled grass, knees pressing into soft ground, a woman praying with fierce calm, a man leading a hymn barely above a murmur, another person keeping watch at the edge of the clearing, listening for hoofbeats or voices. It is tender and tense at once. That mixture defines much of black religious life in 1830. Comfort is real, so is risk. Faith also provides a framework for dignity. In a society constantly announcing that black people are lesser, church teaches that every soul stands before God. That teaching has social force. It affects how people carry themselves, how they bury the dead, how they marry, how they discipline children, how they speak of suffering, and how they imagine a moral universe beyond the plantation ledger or the hostile city street. To say God sees you is no small thing when the law sees you mainly as labour, nuisance, or property. There is a mainstream historical truth here worth lingering over. The Second Great Awakening, a broad religious revival movement that spread across the United States in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, influenced black as well as white Americans. Revival styles, emotional preaching, camp meetings, and evangelical language opened certain spaces for black participation and conversion, though always within the limits imposed by race and power. For some black communities, evangelical Christianity offered a vocabulary of personal worth, divine judgment, and future deliverance that could be adapted powerfully to their own condition. White Americans did not invent that power. They merely discovered, somewhat nervously, that black believers could use it too. Preachers hold a special place in this world. A black exhorter or minister may lead prayer, interpret scripture, counsel families, visit the sick, and steady the grieving. In enslaved communities, such figures often walk a careful line. If they sound too submissive, they lose moral authority among their people. If they sound too bold, they attract white suspicion and possible punishment. It requires extraordinary verbal skill to speak truth in conditions where truth must sometimes travel disguised. A preacher becomes part shepherd, part diplomat, part poet, part strategist. Women, too, shape religious life decisively, even when official titles are limited. They organize gatherings, teach songs, pray over children, nurse the sick, keep moral order in households, and pass down habits of devotion. Their authority may be quieter on paper, but in lived community it is often immense. A grandmother with scripture in her memory and steadiness in her voice can hold a family together better than many a formally educated clergyman. Paper credentials are not the only kind that count. A quirky detail from the period appears in descriptions of ring shouts and other embodied worship practices that blended movement, rhythm, and song. In some places people moved in circles, clapping, shuffling, chanting, and building a spiritual intensity that alarmed white observers who preferred religion to remain very still and decorous. The body itself became part of prayer. White commentators sometimes described such worship as excessive or wild, which is often what anxious people say when they witness joy they cannot regulate. Not every black American in 1830 is Christian, of course, and even among Christians, belief and practice vary. Some families retain traces of African religious understandings in healing, protection, ritual gesture, or attitudes toward ancestors and the unseen world. Some combine these with Christian forms so thoroughly that the strands cannot be neatly separated. Others approach religion with reserve, skepticism, or simple exhaustion. Oppression does not produce one spiritual response. It produces many. Some people lean hard into prayer. Some grow wary of religious language because they have heard it used to justify too much cruelty. Both reactions make sense. Church gatherings often create opportunity for courtship, friendship, and news exchange as well as worship. Before or after service, people greet one another, inquire about relatives, arrange visits, share warnings, and discuss illness, work, and local events. Children stare, wriggle, and eventually doze. Clothes are brushed and mended for the occasion. A clean collar, a carefully tied scarf, polished shoes if you have them. These things matter. Respectability is not only about pleasing white society, it is also about honouring one another and the seriousness of the gathering. You notice smells that belong specifically to church life. Lamp oil, starched cotton, wool damp from evening air, old wood warmed by bodies, maybe a trace of hair, pomade, or peppermint. Sound gathers differently too. Coughs are softer. Laughter, when it comes, is brief and warm. The silence before prayer feels inhabited, not empty. Even a plain room seems to change character once people begin expecting comfort from it. White authorities understand, at least dimly, that black religion can strengthen community beyond their control. That is why laws and customs often try to supervise black gatherings, limit unsanctioned meetings, and require white presence at services. Religious assembly is feared not simply because of theology, but because it creates networks of trust. Any space where people hear one another regularly, learn one another's troubles, and practice hope together can become politically significant. You do not need banners and speeches for that. Sometimes a hymn book and a watchful elder are enough. Scholars continue to debate how far explicit resistance language travelled in sermons and songs before the better-known explosions of the 1830s and beyond. The evidence is suggestive but uneven. Much depended on place, personality, and circumstance. Yet even where there was no overt call to revolt, the religious claim that black people possess souls, dignity, judgment, and divine worth already pushed against the logic of slavery. It set limits on how complete domination could ever feel from the inside. A person taught that God knows his name does not fit smoothly into a slaveholder's arithmetic. Burial and mourning practices reveal another side of faith. Funerals, where allowed, gather the community in grief and witness. The dead are washed, dressed as well as possible, prayed over, and remembered. Songs for the dying and the dead carry immense tenderness. In a society that so often denies black life its full value, the faithful handling of a body after death becomes a declaration. This life mattered. This person belonged to us. The grave is not simply a disposal of remains. It is a moral statement against erasure. By the close of worship, some faces look lighter, not carefree exactly. That would ask too much, but steadier. Shoulders settle, voices soften. A child asleep against a mother's side is lifted carefully. Someone lingers to finish a quiet conversation. Someone else begins a final hymn almost absent-mindedly, because songs have a way of following people toward the door. Outside, the night air feels cooler now. Stars are sharper. The path home is dark, but not quite as lonely after shared prayer. So what does faith mean here? In 1830, under suspicion and control, it means refuge without complete safety. It means a language for sorrow that does not surrender to sorrow. It means gatherings watched by hostile eyes and still full of grace. It means scripture heard through the ache of bondage and the uncertainty of freedom. It means songs that carry memory, warnings, longing, and joy in the same breath. It means ordinary people making sacred space with boards, branches, candlelight, and courage. The powerful may try to supervise the prayer, soften the sermon, or narrow the lesson. Yet once a community begins to believe that heaven does not rank souls by colour, a great many earthly arrangements start looking very temporary indeed. There are few things a fearful society dreads more than a person learning to read in peace. In 1830 that fear is already alive and sharpening. It hangs over schools, over scraps of paper, over slates, over books tucked into trunks or wrapped in cloth. It lingers in the stiff posture of lawmakers and the suspicious talk of men who claim to defend order. For Black Americans, learning is never merely academic in this world. It is hunger, danger, memory, prayer, and possibility pressed into letters. You begin with the image of a child tracing shapes with a finger in dust. No desk, no proper copybook, no polished classroom bell, just dirt, sunlight, and attention. The child draws a curve, then another, then wipes it away before someone notices. Nearby, a woman hangs laundry, glancing over now and then. A man splitting kindling mutters the sound of a letter as if it were a passing remark. Learning often enters life this way. Sideways and quiet, it sneaks in under the door rather than arriving through the front gate with a ribbon on its hat. In many places, Black Americans in 1830 face severe restrictions on formal education. Free black children in northern cities may attend schools founded by churches, mutual aid societies, philanthropists, or black communities themselves. Even there, schooling is unequal, underfunded, segregated, or limited by hostile public opinion. In the South, education for enslaved people is often discouraged, restricted, or violently opposed, especially where white authorities suspect literacy might encourage escape, communication, or independent religious thought. The resistance to black education is not accidental, it is strategic. Knowledge makes people harder to manage. You can feel the difference a book makes in a room, its weight, its smell of paper and cloth, the little hush that falls when it opens. A page turns with a dry whisper, a finger moves beneath a line. Someone sounds out a word slowly, tasting it. The room is otherwise still except for a fire settling in the hearth, or the distant creak of a wagon outside. Reading is physical before it becomes fluent. The mouth shapes letters. The hand stiffens around charcoal or pencil. Eyes narrow in candlelight. Understanding arrives in pieces. Then suddenly a sentence holds. For free black communities, schools are precious and contested institutions. Parents may sacrifice wages, clothing, and sleep to secure lessons for their children. Churches convert rooms into classrooms. Teachers work with too few supplies. Benches wobble. Ink runs low. Slates are passed from hand to hand. Yet children gather anyway. They recite. They spell. They memorize. They learn arithmetic useful for trade and survival. They learn geography, scripture, penmanship, and the discipline of sitting with their minds awake. A school can be noisy in the charming way schools always are. Coughs, chair scrapes, whispered corrections, the proud loudness of a child suddenly sure of an answer. That scene matters because education is tied to respectability, employment, leadership, and self-defense. A literate person can read a contract, a newspaper notice, a shipping list, a street sign, or a legal form. He can write a letter to a distant relative. She can keep an account book or help run a church society. A child taught to read may later teach siblings, neighbours, or a spouse. Learning multiplies. That is exactly why it alarms those invested in control. Ignorance is easier to supervise. Literacy leaks. Among enslaved people, education often takes place through fragments. A child in a white household notices letters in a primer while fanning a sleeping baby. A domestic servant hears lessons recited and stores them silently. A skilled artisan recognizes words on shipping crates or shop signs. A preacher memorizes scripture passages heard loud and begins to connect sound to symbol. Some learn from sympathetic white children, some from poor whites, some from free black neighbors, some from one another. The methods are improvised because the opportunity is improvised. There is a particular tension in households where enslaved children hover near white education without being allowed to share it. Imagine standing near a doorway while a white child stumbles through a lesson he barely values. He yawns. He fidgets. He complains about grammar. Meanwhile, you absorb each word like water in dry ground. The unfairness of it would be almost theatrical if it were not so real. The lesson is within earshot, but not within permission. So you steal it with memory. Writing is even more dangerous than reading in some contexts. A written note can travel. A letter can connect communities. A forged past can open distance. A list of names can organize action. A verse copied from the Bible can become private comfort or public challenge. To write is to leave evidence that thought has taken shape. Slave societies prefer black thought to remain audible, deniable, and under supervision. Ink, by contrast, can outlast the moment. It is wonderfully rude that a line written at midnight may still exist by dawn. A mainstream historical fact here is that white anxiety about black literacy intensifies around this period, especially in the Upper South and Deep South. The years surrounding 1830 see growing concern over anti-slavery pamphlets, black preaching, and the circulation of radical ideas. Lawmakers and planters increasingly treat reading and writing not as innocent skills, but as potential pathways to disorder, even where no explicit statewide ban yet exists. Local custom and pressure can be enough to make teaching perilous. Fear often arrives before legislation does. It clears its throat and waits for the law to catch up. You can picture a secret lesson at night. The workday is done. The last bowl has been washed. Children are supposed to be asleep. A single candle burns low, its smoke faint and bitter. Two people lean close over a scrap of paper. One traces a letter with a blunt finger. The other whispers, "That one is B." Outside, frogs thrum in wet ground. A dog barks far off. Every sound from the yard makes the heart shift. Learning under these conditions is intimate in a way formal schooling rarely is. It feels like passing flame from one hand to another. Sometimes the Bible becomes the first text, not only because it is available in some households, but because it carries religious authority difficult to condemn outright. If a person wishes to know the Psalms, the Gospels, the story of Exodus, that desire can be framed as devotion rather than ambition. Of course, many white authorities are not fooled by this. They understand that a person who reads Scripture independently may also interpret it independently, and that independent interpretation is a dangerous habit. Once someone starts asking what a text actually says, a great many worldly hierarchies become less convincing. Teachers in black communities hold extraordinary importance. Some are formally educated. Many are not by elite standards, but they know enough to open doors. A woman who can teach spelling and numbers in a church basement becomes a pillar of the neighbourhood. A sailor who has learned to read from maritime life may show boys letters on signs and invoices. A minister might teach scripture, then quietly add penmanship. A barber, carpenter, or seamstress may teach children after work in exchange for a few coins or a favour. Schooling is braided into community labour because there are too few separate institutions to carry it alone. Women are especially central in this hidden educational world. They teach children prayers, letters, counting, and songs. They preserve family memory, names, and moral instruction. In free black households, mothers often push fiercely for schooling even when money is scarce. In enslaved communities, women may pass on oral knowledge, secret reading lessons, or practical numeracy tied to marketing and household management. Their work as teachers is not always recognized by formal records. but it shapes lives quietly and deeply. A great deal of education happens at the washtub, near the stove, while mending, while walking, while soothing a child to sleep. There is also a stubborn oral culture that carries learning beyond print. Stories, proverbs, sermons, songs, and remembered histories teach values, caution, humour, and identity. A person who cannot read may still possess immense knowledge. This matters because it prevents us from mistaking literacy for intelligence. Many black Americans in 1830 are denied formal education, yet they are not empty of thought. Far from it. They read people, weather, markets, and moods with extraordinary sophistication. Oral instruction helps preserve that knowledge and pass it on. The spoken word remains a school in its own right. Historians still argue over how widespread clandestine literacy was among enslaved people by 1830, partly because successful secrecy leaves poor records. A person who learned to read quietly and never produced letters that survived may vanish from the archive. White observers often underestimated black learning or reported it only when alarmed. The result is a patchy picture. We know the desire for literacy was strong. We know teaching occurred. We know repression followed. The exact scale remains uncertain, but the pattern is unmistakable. Wherever a path to learning existed, someone tried to walk it. A quirky detail survives in anecdotes about letters practiced on fences, boards, ashes, and even bread flour spread thin on a table. When paper was scarce or dangerous, any surface might become a temporary classroom. A stick in sand, a nail on soft wood, a wet finger on a dark tabletop. The lesson might last only a minute before being wiped away, but a minute can matter. Learning does not always need permanence at first. It only needs repetition and courage. In northern cities, black schools also face insult from the outside. White mobs may resent their presence. Public funding is limited or withheld. Buildings are poor. Teachers are criticised. Yet parents continue sending children, dressed as carefully as circumstances allow, carrying books or slates if they have them. There is dignity in this routine. The walk to school becomes almost ceremonial. Hair combed, face washed, collar straightened. The child steps into a future adults are trying to build with very little help. That future is fragile, but it is visible enough to keep moving toward. Education also intersects with anti-slavery activism. Literate black leaders write petitions, speeches, pamphlets, and editorials. Newspapers circulate arguments against colonization and slavery. Church leaders correspond across cities. Meetings produce resolutions. Even people who cannot read directly may hear these texts read aloud and discussed. A community that values reading creates listeners as well as readers. News spreads by voice after passing through print. One person deciphers the newspaper. 10 people carry the contents into kitchens, docks, and alleyways. Literacy becomes communal property, not merely individual possession. At the same time, this makes literate black people especially visible to hostile authorities. A person seen with books may invite suspicion. A teacher can become a target. A preacher with papers in his pocket may be watched more closely. The stereotype of the dangerous, educated black person grows from white insecurity as much as from any actual event. The thought underneath it is plain enough. If black Americans understand the world clearly, they may refuse the place assigned to them in it. That thought happens to be correct, which is why it scares people. The emotional tone of learning under pressure is unusual. It combines delight and fear so tightly that they almost become one sensation. A child reads a sentence and beams. An adult immediately hushes the room because someone passed near the window. A woman learns to sign her name and feels a private thrill. Then she folds the paper fast because the wrong eyes would not admire the achievement. Progress comes in pulses. Joy appears, then hides, then returns. It is the rhythm of growth in hostile ground. By candle end, the lesson closes. The book is wrapped away, the slate is hidden, ashes are brushed smooth. A final letter is repeated softly, once more, for certainty. Outside, the air smells of cold earth and wood smoke. Inside, minds are more awake than bodies should be at this hour. There is a particular kind of tiredness that follows learning after a full day of labour. Yet it is a sweeter tiredness than many others. It comes with a sense that something has been added, not only taken away. So what does it mean to seek learning in 1830 as a black American? It means reaching for a tool the wider society is trying very hard to keep from your hands. It means classrooms built in church rooms, kitchens, and memory. It means letters traced in dust, scripture recited by heart, newspapers read aloud, names signed with pride, and books treated like valuable contraband. It means free communities investing scarce resources in schools because the mind of a child is worth the sacrifice. It means enslaved people risking punishment for the chance to understand words that others use to rule them. The candle is small, the night is watchful, but once a letter has taken root in the mind, it becomes very difficult to make darkness feel complete. City streets promise movement, and movement always carries a hint of freedom. You can turn a corner. You can disappear into a crowd for a few breaths. You can hear many lives at once and imagine choosing your own direction among them. In 1830, that sensation is real for black Americans in towns and cities, but it is never simple. Urban life offers wages, churches, schools, markets, docks, conversation, and community. It also offers insult, surveillance, exclusion, and the constant possibility that a busy street may become the place where your status is challenged. Your body seized, or your dignity cut down in public. You step first into the sound of the city. Wagon wheels grind over cobbles, horses stamp and snort, ship bells ring from the harbour, vendors call out bread, oysters, fruit, or fish. A blacksmith hammers in a fast, bright rhythm. Laundry flaps over alley yards. Somewhere a child cries. Somewhere a church bell counts the hour. The air is thick with mixed smells. River water, tar, chimney soot, fresh-cut wood, spilled beer, roasting meat, stale refuse, wet wool, and rain rising from brick after a shower. It is a living place, crowded and restless. That energy can feel thrilling. It can also feel dangerous because so many eyes are present. Free black communities in northern cities are growing by this time, especially in places like Philadelphia, New York, and Boston. Families build neighborhoods around churches, schools, burial societies, mutual aid organizations, and small businesses. Some own homes, some rent cramped rooms and take in lodgers. Some find work at the docks, in service, in trades, in street vending, or at sea. There is real urban black life here. Not merely survival, but aspiration. New clothes saved for Sunday. Dues paid into a benevolent society. School books wrapped carefully against weather. A barber shop with polished tools. A seamstress bent over candlelit stitching late into the evening. The city allows these things to gather in one place, yet the same city that offers opportunity also sharpens inequality. White employers often reserve better paid jobs for white workers. White customers may expect service without respect. White neighborhoods can close their doors with invisible force. Public conveyances may exclude or humiliate black passengers. Schools may segregate or refuse entrance. Voting rights, where they exist at all, are narrowed by race and property requirements. A black resident may walk the same street as a white clerk or merchant, breathe the same damp harbour air, and still be told by law and custom that he occupies a lesser civic reality. That mismatch creates a peculiar strain. You are in public, but never fully of it. You belong to the city by labour, by taxes, by worship, by memory, by burial of kin, and by daily use. Still, the city often treats black presence as provisional. One official smile can vanish when paperwork is requested. One routine errand can become a scene. One drunk man in the wrong mood can decide he is guardian of public order for the evening, which is a role no one asked him to play and one he performs with far too much enthusiasm. In southern towns and cities, urban life contains even tighter contradictions. Enslaved people move through streets on errands, at markets, at workshops, and on the waterfront. Some are hired out, some labour in domestic service, some work beside free black people and immigrants in messy economic arrangements that suit employers more than workers. There may be more mobility than on an isolated plantation, more chances to exchange news, more glimpses of the wider world. But the city is full of checkpoints, both literal and social. Patrols, constables, passes, curfews, and the eyes of strangers all keep pressure on movement. The street is open space, but it is not neutral ground. Take a walk through a port city at dawn. The sky above the masts is pale grey. Water slaps softly against the wharf. Men roll barrels down planks and curse when one jams. Rope burns the palm. Fish scales flash in heaps. Black dock workers lift, sort, stack, and carry with practised economy. They know tides, cargo, accents, prices, and gossip from far places. Sailors bring news from the Caribbean, from northern ports, from New Orleans, from Liverpool, from anywhere the wind and commerce have gone. Information pools at the waterfront. This is one reason authorities dislike it. A dock is a classroom disguised as labour. Waterfront work has its own rough fraternity, but not an equal one. Black seamen and dock workers are essential to maritime commerce, yet they remain vulnerable to arrest, wage theft, exclusion from boarding houses, and sudden violence. A captain may praise a sailor's skill while refusing him a decent berth on land. A labour contractor may promise a day's wages and shave coins off at sunset. A customs officer may inspect documents with theatrical suspicion. The sea broadens the horizon, but the shore tightens again. Markets are another urban stage. In some cities, black women sell produce, cooked food, flowers, cakes, or small goods from baskets, trays, and stalls. Their work requires stamina, charm, watchfulness, and quick arithmetic. They rise early, secure goods, claim a place, call out to customers, fend off insults, count change, and carry unsold items home if the day goes badly. The market smells of onions, mud, poultry feathers, ripe fruit, fish brine, coffee, hay, and humanity all pressed together. It is exhausting and social. A woman at market may earn enough to feed a family, pay rent, or help a church fund. But she also stands exposed to public judgment every hour. A curious detail from the period appears in descriptions of market women who became local characters, known for a sharp tongue, a memorable hat, or a particular recipe. Some built loyal customers across racial lines. White shoppers who would not accept black equality in civic life still happily relied on black women for good bread, hot pies, or fresh vegetables. The contradiction is almost comic until you remember who gets to keep the profits, and who must still step carefully when the constable walks past. Urban black neighbourhoods are places of intense social life. Children play in alleys, yards, and steps when space allows. Adults exchange news through windows, across fences, at pumps, on stoops, and outside churches. Clothing is mended, rooms are rented, meals are shared. Illness is noticed quickly because walls are thin and neighbours attentive. Benevolent societies step in when death, job loss, or sickness strikes. A city can make community feel physically close, sometimes too close for comfort, but close enough that people know who is struggling and who needs help carrying coal up the stairs. Churches anchor much of this world. On Sundays or meeting nights, streets around black churches fill with a different rhythm. Shoes cleaned as best they can be, hats brushed, children instructed not to dawdle, elders greeted with respect. Inside, worship provides dignity. Outside, the church door also functions as bulletin board, news exchange, matchmaker, committee room, and moral centre. Leadership grows here, so does argument, because any living community contains both grace and opinions. Urban black life is not a sentimental painting. It is busy, ambitious, tired, political, devout, practical, and very much alive. Historians still argue about the exact size and economic mobility of some early free black urban populations, because census categories are imperfect and records often distort status, occupation, and household composition. Some individuals achieve remarkable stability as property holders, entrepreneurs, mariners, or skilled tradesmen. Many more remain poor, vulnerable to economic downturns and racism in employment. What is clear is that urban black communities are developing institutions of their own, even as the broader city tries to fence them into the lowest rungs of civic life. And then there is kidnapping, one of the most chilling threats shadowing urban freedom. Free black people in northern cities know that men may seize children, youths, and even adults, especially near docks, roads, or the edges of town, and sell them south into slavery. The danger is not imaginary. It is discussed in homes, churches, and newspapers. Parents warn children about strangers. Young people are told not to wander alone. Community leaders organize watchfulness. A city crowd can hide you for a moment. It can also swallow you. That knowledge changes the way freedom feels under your feet. Imagine a mother sending her son across town with an errand. The bread sent from a bakery drifts into the street. Rainwater runs down the gutter. A cooper's mallet knocks from a yard nearby. The boy knows the route. He also knows not to stop for talk, not to trust a smiling stranger too easily, not to lose the paper tucked in his pocket, not to miss the turning by the pump. Childhood in a black urban household includes these lessons as naturally as manners. That is a terrible sentence, but it is true. Violence can erupt more openly as well. White mobs in northern cities sometimes attack black neighbourhoods, churches, homes, or meeting places, especially when labour competition, racial hatred, or anti-slavery agitation stirs public tension. A city that prides itself on refinement can become quite coarse in a hurry when a crowd decides black success is an insult. Brick windows shatter just as easily in a cultured town as in any rough village. Respectable coats do not improve a mob's character much. They only make the hypocrisy better dressed. In the South, ordinances and customs regulate black urban presence through curfews, pass systems, limits on assembly, and police scrutiny. A free black artisan may work all day and still be questioned on the way home. An enslaved person hired out in town may have more contact with others, but no real claim over his wages or time. Night travel is especially fraught. Lantern light catches on wet stones. Footsteps echo in narrow lanes. A challenge from the dark can arrive before a face is fully visible. The city at night holds freedom and fear close together. Still, urban settings allow cultural exchange and social improvisation difficult to find elsewhere. Music filters out of windows. Sailors bring new phrases and rhythms. Foodways blend at markets and boarding houses. Tailors, hairdressers, and cooks shape style as well as sustenance. Funeral processions, holiday gatherings, church anniversaries, and mutual society events create public moments of black presence that are both ordinary and quietly significant. To walk dressed well among your own people, to greet friends on a busy corner, to hear your community's voices rise above wagon noise, this too is part of city life. It nourishes the spirit even when the law offers little nourishment at all. You also notice how reputation matters in town. A black teacher, minister, barber, or shopkeeper may become well known, and that visibility can protect or endanger. Good reputation can attract customers, allies, and respect within the community. It can also provoke resentment from whites who dislike seeing black competence displayed too clearly. Success is admired and watched at the same time. A nice pair of boots on the wrong black man can upset the local racial imagination more than any sermon. The weather changes the city's mood. In summer, alleys smell stronger, tempers shorten, and crowded rooms turn airless by dusk. In winter, smoke settles low, fingers go stiff, and icy steps punish the unwary. Rain sends mud across streets and through doorways. Snow quiets wheels but not worry. Through every season, black workers carry, scrub, sew, preach, sell, mend, and teach, building urban life from below while the city often congratulates itself without naming who keeps it alive. So what is uneasy freedom on the streets of 1830? It is a life where churches stand beside hostility, where wages come with insult, where neighbourhoods nurture pride under threat, and where a walk to market may feel ordinary until it very suddenly does not. It is the harbour wind and the constable's stare. It is a rented room full of family and a city charter full of limits. It is a child carrying a slate and a mother watching from the doorway until the child turns the corner. It is danger distributed through public space and resilience distributed through community. The city offers motion, and black Americans make much of that motion. But every street carries the same quiet question beneath its noise. How free are you, really, if everyone around you feels entitled to test the answer? Family is one of the first things people build and one of the first things power tries to price. In 1830, black Americans hold fast to kinship with a seriousness sharpened by danger, because the forces surrounding them do not merely inconvenience family life. They threaten to sort it, tax it, scatter it, mock it, or sell it. That threat gives ordinary affection a deeper weight. A hand on a child's shoulder means one thing in any century. Here it means more. It means love under pressure. It means claim without full protection. It means a quiet refusal to let the market define who belongs to whom. You begin inside a household at first light. A baby stirs before the room is warm. Someone adds wood to the fire and coaxes a weak flame back into life. A mother smooths a blanket over another child. A father sits on a low stool to mend a strap before the day begins. Someone yawns, someone coughs. The smell of ash, damp cloth, and cornmeal rises into the room. This could be any family scene, and that is exactly the point. Black families in 1830 are not abstractions made only of suffering. They are made of routines, habits, nicknames, discipline, laughter, worry, memory, and stubborn everyday care. Yet the law sees these bonds unevenly. For enslaved people, marriage is rarely recognized with the full force granted to white unions. Couples marry in spirit, in church, before witnesses, through community blessing, or by mutual vow. But the state does not reliably defend that bond against sale or transfer. A husband may be moved to another county. A wife may be inherited by a different branch of a white family. Children may remain with one parent or with neither. What should be the most ordinary fact of life, belonging to your own people, becomes negotiable in the eyes of those who profit from ownership. This is one of the central truths of the era. The domestic slave trade tears at family stability with cold efficiency. Men, women, and children are sold from the Upper South into the expanding cotton and sugar regions of the Deep South. Traders value age, health, fertility, skill, and obedience, often reducing family members to separate entries on a list. The language of sale is dry. The consequences are not. When a mother fears that a child may be taken, time itself changes shape. Every ordinary evening becomes charged. Every embrace carries a shadow. You can imagine the awful stillness after a rumour spreads that a trader has arrived nearby. People continue with tasks because tasks must be done. But the room feels different. The spoon touches the bowl more quietly. Children are watched more closely. A couple speaks in low tones once others sleep. Outside, frogs call from the ditch and a wagon passes on the road. Inside, every sound seems to ask the same question. Who will still be here next week? There are few torments more cruel than turning love into anticipation of the loss. And still people marry. They court. They choose one another when they can. They joke, flirt, exchange glances across churchyards and workspaces, and seek the blessing of elders. Some ceremonies are brief and practical. Some include song and prayer. Some take place in the presence of a preacher. Some in the presence of family alone. Among enslaved communities, jumping the broom appears in some regions as a custom associated with union, though historians still debate how widespread or uniform that practice was by 1830. In some places it may have been common. In others it may have been rare or differently understood. What matters most is not a single ritual form, but the determination to mark commitment despite a hostile legal world. Parents carry a particular burden. To raise a child under bondage or under insecure freedom is to become expert in both tenderness and caution. You teach manners, respect, prayer, and practical skills. You also teach watchfulness. Do not wander too far. Answer carefully. Stay close. Remember names. Remember where home is. A child in a free black family may be taught to guard papers, avoid suspicious strangers, and return before dark. A child in an enslaved family may be taught how to read moods, when to speak, when to be still, and how to draw comfort from kin even when the household is crowded and tired. Parenting is never only affection here, it is strategy. Mothers often stand at the centre of family continuity, not because fathers are absent in feeling, but because sale, labour assignment, and legal custom so often destabilise paternal presence. A mother cooks, nurses, disciplines, soothes, instructs, and remembers. She knows who's related to whom across cabins, towns, plantations, and distant counties. She preserves names, stories, habits, recipes, warnings, and griefs. White observers sometimes reduce black women to labour or reproductive value. But inside their communities, many are archivists of belonging. They know who your grandmother was, who your uncle resembled, which hymn your aunt always sang, and where the family Bible, ribbon, or spoon came from if such treasures exist at all. Fathers and father figures matter deeply too. A man may not possess legal authority over his enslaved children, yet he teaches them with words, example, craft, and protection where possible. He repairs shoes, tells stories, settles quarrels, shows a boy how to whittle safely, shows a girl how to judge a horse's mood, or teaches both children how to carry themselves with dignity under scrutiny. In free black homes, fathers often bear the exhausting responsibility of providing in a labour market designed to underpay them, while still projecting steadiness before their families. Their role is shaped by limits they did not choose, but love works through limits every day. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and unrelated elders also fill vital places. Kinship in black communities often extends beyond the narrow household. A child may be cared for by a grandmother while parents labour. A neighbour may be called auntie out of love and respect. An older man in the church may counsel several young families as if they were all partly his own. These broad networks are not accidents. They are adaptations to a world in which blood relatives may be sold away. Migration may separate households, and formal institutions may fail to protect the vulnerable. Community becomes family not as a poetic slogan, but as a survival structure. One fascinating detail from the period is the importance of naming. Children are sometimes named after parents, grandparents, admired figures, biblical characters, or loved ones who have died or been sold away. A name can preserve connection when distance cannot be prevented. In communities where legal records are sparse or hostile, spoken lineage matters enormously. To say a child carries a grandmother's name is to keep that grandmother present in the room. Memory becomes portable. For free black families in northern cities, marriage and parenting may enjoy more legal acknowledgement, but social pressure remains severe. Housing is cramped, work is uncertain, schools are unequal, white hostility can limit nearly every path upward. Still, many families build remarkable stability through church membership, mutual aid, careful budgeting, and strict domestic discipline. Clothes are mended, rent is paid as best it can be, children are sent to school or apprenticeships, dinners are stretched, savings are tucked away. Respectability becomes both sincere value and tactical defence. A neat home and well-behaved children are not merely signs of moral aspiration. They are arguments made in a society eager to deny black worth. Historians continue to debate how much demographic stability existed among enslaved families in different regions before the interstate trade intensified even further, because conditions varied sharply. In some older tobacco regions, natural increase in established communities could allow longer family continuity. In rapidly expanding frontier zones, sale and forced migration could shatter those patterns. Large plantations, small farms, urban households, and rural estates all produce different family experiences. Yet across these differences, one pattern appears again and again. Black people invest heavily in kinship, even when the surrounding system refuses to honour it. Children experience this world with painful complexity. They play, laugh, sulk, and make trouble like children everywhere. They also absorb the adult atmosphere sooner than childhood should require. A child notices when adults stop talking after a white visitor appears. A child notices the change in a mother's face when traders are mentioned. A child notices who is missing at supper. Even joy can carry seriousness. Games may imitate church, work, market, or travel. Songs may contain lessons. Toys made from cloth scraps, carved wood, corn husks, or string become companions in a childhood not fully protected from adult fear. There are also moments of family celebration. Births bring pride and concern together. Weddings create an occasion for best clothes, shared food, music, and smiling elders. Naming a baby can feel like an act of future making. A child taking first steps across a packed floor can draw laughter loud enough to make the whole room lighter. Someone cooks a special dish if ingredients allow. Someone hums while braiding hair. Someone saves a bit of sugar for a good day. These small celebrations matter because they declare that joy is not a permission the world gets to grant or withhold. The market, cruelly enough, studies these same families through a different lens. Traders and enslavers may discuss a woman with several children in terms of increase. They may weigh whether to sell a child separately, or together with a mother depending on profit. Young men are valued for labour, young women for labour and childbearing. Older people often discounted unless their skills are useful. This is where the moral horror of the system is most naked. Love sees family. The market sees inventory combinations. The same child kissed to sleep at night can appear by morning as a number on a ledger. Not all separations come through sale. Labour itself divides families. A husband hired out in town may sleep away from his wife most nights. A mother in domestic service may spend long hours caring for white children, while her own child is watched by an elder. Seasonal demands pull people into fields, kitchens, docks, and workshops, for such long stretches that family life survives in fragments. A meal together, a short visit on Sunday, a conversation while walking back from church. Under such conditions, even brief time with loved ones becomes valuable enough to be measured almost physically. Religion often helps hold these bonds together. Family prayers, church weddings, funeral rites, and scriptural language give emotional form to relationships the law may refuse fully to recognize. To call one another husband and wife before God is a claim beyond the reach of any county clerk. To bury kin with song and care is to insist that belonging does not end where the law grew careless. Faith does not erase the danger, but it gives vocabulary to loyalty, sorrow, and hope. A slightly humorous but revealing human truth appears in household accounts and recollections. Families argue, of course they do, children dawdle, husbands forget things, wives scold, cousins gossip, grandmothers disapprove of someone's shoes or tone of voice. Even under terrible pressure, domestic life still contains ordinary irritation. This matters because it reminds you that black families in 1830 are not simply noble symbols under oppression. They are people, wonderfully and sometimes exasperatingly people, with tempers, preferences, habits, and familiar household complaints. Humanity is not only found in grand suffering, it is also in who left the bucket empty again. When illness comes, kinship proves its practical strength. Someone sits up through the night cooling a fevered forehead. Someone watches children while a mother recovers from childbirth. Someone carries broth, herbs, or a blanket across the yard. Mutual care is often the only reliable healthcare available. The same is true in mourning. When death enters a family, the community gathers, cooks, prays, digs, sings, and remembers. A household in grief is not left entirely alone if neighbours can help it. So what does family mean for black Americans in 1830? It means bonds formed in the teeth of a system that would rather reduce people to labour units and sale categories. It means marriage without full legal shelter, parenting under surveillance, and childhood shaped by both delight and danger. It means grandmothers preserving lineages, fathers teaching dignity, mothers carrying worlds, and neighbours stepping in as kin when blood relations are torn apart. It means the market trying to measure affection in dollars and repeatedly failing to understand what it sees. Families can be split, rented, weakened, and wounded. Even so, they keep binding themselves together through names, memory, ritual, labour, care, and fierce ordinary love. Not all resistance announces itself with a trumpet. In 1830, much of it moves quietly, wearing plain clothes, carrying water, mending tools, stirring supper, answering politely, and waiting for the right moment. For black Americans living under slavery, discrimination, and the narrowing grip of law, resistance takes many forms. Some are bold and visible, others are so small that the powerful barely notice them, which is often exactly why they work. A system built on control invites defiance at every scale, from the whispered plan to the slowed hand. You begin with the ordinary day, because that is where much resistance lives. A field hand straightens up for one extra breath before bending again. A woman in a kitchen saves a better scrap of food for her child instead of the master's table. A man at the dock listens carefully to news not meant for him and repeats it later where it matters. A literate person reads a notice aloud to those denied the page. A mother teaches caution in a voice calm enough not to alarm the young. None of this looks dramatic from outside, yet it all protects human life from being flattened into labour alone. That is one of the key facts of black life in this era. Resistance is not limited to revolt. Revolt happens, and the fear of it shapes white behaviour constantly. But most people living under intense surveillance cannot survive by open rebellion every day. They survive by conserving energy, reading opportunity, protecting kin, building networks, and refusing in 1,000 subtle ways to let the master's will become the whole truth of their lives. Endurance itself becomes active when the world is designed to wear you down. You can hear this quieter resistance in tone of voice. An answer that sounds obedient but reveals almost nothing. A joke shared sideways between workers after a white overseer passes. A hymn line sung with one meaning for the listener in power and another for everyone else in the room. Language splits and doubles under pressure. It becomes clever. It learns to travel in disguise. Oppression creates many forms of silence, but it also creates very skilled speakers. Work offers endless chances for contest. Tools break. Animals wander. Wagons jam. A task takes longer than expected. A pile is counted wrongly. A message arrives late. Some mishaps are accidents, some are not. It can be hard for the powerful to distinguish between honest error, sabotage, exhaustion, and low morale, which is deeply inconvenient for them. A person forced to labour may resist by pretending not to know exactly how efficient he could be. Another may know very well how to damage a machine or dull a blade just enough to cost time without drawing obvious blame. Resistance can be mechanical. Enslavers complained often about theft, idleness, insolence, and disorder, though their complaints should be read carefully. Sometimes they simply called any trace of human self-direction insolence. Still, stolen food, tools, cloth, fuel, and time were real features of plantation and urban life. These acts were not always framed by the people doing them as grand politics. Sometimes they were necessity. Sometimes fairness claimed back through stealth. Sometimes both at once. If a household lives on short rations while producing wealth for others, the moral lecture against taking an extra chicken begins to sound a bit thin. Running away is perhaps the most dramatic personal refusal short of open revolt. Some people flee for a night or a week to escape punishment, visit family, or forced negotiation. Others attempt permanent escape northward, into cities, into swamps, into maroon communities, onto ships, or across state lines. The dangers are immense. Dogs, patrols, hunger, weather, unfamiliar roads, betrayal, and legal pursuit all stand in the way. Even so, people keep trying. That persistence reveals something vital. No amount of law or violence can make bondage feel natural from the inside. Imagine the sensory world of flight. Wet grass against your ankles before dawn, the smell of mud and pine, heartbeat louder than the birds at first light, a creek crossed carefully to break a trail, mosquitoes rising from low ground, hunger sharpening by afternoon, the bark of a distant dog turning every nerve alert. Escape is not an abstract idea here. It is blister, cold, thirst, and memory pulling you forward. A person on the run carries fear, but also a fierce clarity. Every step says no. In towns and cities, resistance may involve forged passes, false names, hidden wages, secret meetings, covert teaching, or strategic use of the courts where possible. A free black community can resist by organising schools, churches, burial societies, and benevolent associations that reduce dependence on hostile white institutions. A black newspaper editor resists by printing arguments. A preacher resists by giving moral shape to communal hope. A parent resists by sending a child to school in clean clothes despite public insult. Respectability itself can become a form of rebuttal, though never a complete shield. There is also resistance in preserving culture. Songs, naming patterns, foodways, hair practices, prayer styles, storytelling traditions, healing knowledge, and communal etiquette all protect personhood against a system that wants only output. To keep a recipe alive, to teach a child an elder's proverb, to sing in a rhythm that the powerful cannot quite control, these things matter. They say that black life will not be reduced to what white law records. Culture can hide in plain sight. It is one of the cleverest forms of defiance. Historians still debate how coordinated some acts of resistance were in different regions before the large shocks that soon followed, because secrecy leaves scattered evidence, and white records often exaggerate some threats, while missing others entirely. Not every whispered gathering was a conspiracy. Not every broken plough was sabotage. Not every prayer meeting hid an escape plan. Yet enough evidence survives to show that black Americans continually assessed risk, exchanged information, and acted with purpose. The exact shape may blur, the pattern does not. One important current in 1830 is the spread of anti-slavery language through black communities, especially in cities and ports. Pamphlets, newspapers, sermons, seafaring news, and oral retellings all carry arguments against colonization and slavery. David Walker's appeal, published in 1829, is a striking example of how words can unsettle an entire region. White authorities react with alarm not because words are harmless, but because they understand that ideas can strengthen resistance long before any visible action occurs. A page can travel where a person cannot. You can picture a cramped room where one person reads aloud by candlelight while others listen. The window is covered. The air smells of wax and wool. Someone shifts on a bench. Someone else murmurs agreement at a sharp line. Not everyone present can read every word on the page, but everyone understands the force of it. Spoken aloud, print becomes community property. The room itself changes. People sit a little straighter. Possibility enters. No wonder anxious officials dislike literacy. Women play crucial roles in resistance. Though later stories do not always grant them centre stage, they hide fugitives, pass information, preserve money, teach children, conceal papers, negotiate with authorities, manipulate household routines, and sustain family networks across distance. They resist through patience, strategy, and nerve. A woman in a white household may know more about that household's movements than anyone else. A market woman may hear news from several neighbourhoods in a morning. A laundress handling clothing and conversation alike may gather intelligence while appearing simply busy. Underestimation becomes one of the few gifts patriarchy accidentally hands over. Children resist too, though in form suited to their age. They carry messages, they learn in secret, they keep watch, they remember names and directions, they practice silence when adults need silence. This is a sad truth, because childhood should not require such skills. But it is also a testament to how resistance becomes woven into daily upbringing. A child raised under danger learns that being useful can be a form of love. A quirky detail from the period appears in stories of coded communication hidden inside ordinary acts. A certain phrase used at market, a tune sung at a particular pace, a knock pattern at a door, a bundle tied in an unusual way. Not every later claim of secret codes can be verified neatly, and historians are right to be cautious. Still, in any watched society, people develop signals. It would be stranger if they did not. Human beings are endlessly inventive when privacy is scarce. Open defiance does occur, and white communities remain haunted by the possibility. Memories of the Haitian Revolution still circulate. Gabriel's planned rebellion in 1800 and Denmark-Vesey's alleged conspiracy in 1822 remain vivid in white southern fear. These memories lead to harsher surveillance, tighter assembly laws, and deeper suspicion of black gatherings, preaching, and literacy. White anxiety often tells you where black resistance has been effective. People in power do not usually tighten laws because nothing is happening. They tighten them because they are worried. At the same time, resistance does not always aim at immediate overthrow. Sometimes the goal is to survive a season, keep a child safe, maintain a marriage, avoid a whipping, secure a little money, or preserve the possibility of future action. This practical horizon matters. Heroism in real life is often less theatrical than memory prefers. It may look like making sure a cousin knows which road is unsafe. It may look like feigning illness for one afternoon's relief. It may look like hiding a book in a flower bin. It may look like refusing inward surrender. There is also legal resistance, limited though the law is. Free black people sometimes petition, sue, register protests, or use churches and associations to challenge local injustice. These efforts face long odds, biased courts, and racist officials. Still, they are attempts to force the nation to hear its own contradictions spoken aloud. A petition signed by black citizens is more than paperwork. It is a statement of civic presence. It says, in effect, we are here. We understand what is being done to us, and we reject it. Humour plays its part too. This can sound surprising, but it should not. Humour under oppression is not denial. It is control over perspective. A cutting remark delivered only among trusted friends. A mimicry of an overseer's pompous walk. a sly comment about a white man's endless concern for order while tripping over his own boots. Such moments release pressure and protect dignity. They remind people that the powerful are often ridiculous, and ridicule is very hard for authority to tolerate gracefully. Spiritual life remains intertwined with resistance. Prayer meetings can restore courage. Scripture can frame suffering without sanctifying the oppressor. The story of Exodus offers language of deliverance. The Psalms offer grief that does not pretend to be calm. Even patient faith can hold an edge when the faithful begin to imagine divine judgment falling not on themselves, but on those who claim ownership over them. Religion does not always produce resistance, but it often gives resistance endurance. In free black communities, institution building is one of the strongest forms of collective defiance. To found a school, maintain a church, publish a newspaper, support a widow, bury the dead with dignity, or raise money for community needs is to say that black life will organise itself despite exclusion. These institutions provide material help, but they also create habits of leadership and mutual obligation. They teach people how to act together. That lesson extends far beyond the walls of any one building. By late evening, resistance often retreats again into quiet forms. Doors close, lamps dim. A hidden paper is checked once more. A warning is passed to a neighbour. A child is told, gently, to remember what was heard and what must not be repeated carelessly. Outside, the night is full of ordinary sounds, insects, horses, distant voices, a pan set down, a dog turning twice before sleep. Inside, beneath those ordinary sounds, intention remains awake. The system may claim the day. It does not fully own the mind. So what does resistance look like in 1830? It looks like escape and sabotage. Yes, but also literacy, prayer, theft, laughter, skill, secrecy, organisation, and care. It looks like people refusing to become obedient in spirit even when forced into obedience in motion. It looks like mothers teaching children, workers shaping pace, communities building institutions, readers sharing dangerous words, and fugitives choosing the road over the chain. It looks different in fields, kitchens, ports, alleys, and churches, but it carries the same essential truth. Tighter control never produces total surrender. It produces new forms of refusal, some loud, some quiet, and many ingenious enough to survive another dawn. By the end of 1830, the air feels tighter, even when nothing visible has changed. That is often how a harder era begins, not always with a single proclamation or a dramatic public turning, but with a thickening mood. Conversations shorten when certain topics arise. Officials grow more watchful. Ministers choose words with extra care. Parents listen more closely at the door. Lawmakers speak the language of order with fresh urgency. For black Americans, this year does not simply sit alone on the calendar, it gathers pressure, and pressure has a way of announcing that something heavier is on its way. You feel this in the quality of public speech. White Americans who benefit from slavery sound more defensive, more insistent, more eager to explain themselves. That is never a comforting sign. People secure in justice do not usually spend so much time rehearsing it. Planters, editors, ministers, and politicians talk about stability, danger, discipline, agitation, outside influence, and the need for stronger control. The words repeat so often they almost become furniture, yet beneath them sits fear. Fear of revolt, fear of literacy, fear of communication across distance, fear that free black communities, black churches, black sailors, black readers, and black families might become too connected to manage. One major fact shapes this atmosphere. The years around 1830 mark a period of intensified white anxiety about anti-slavery writing, black organising, and the spread of ideas that challenge slavery's legitimacy. David Walker's appeal, published in 1829, has already shaken white authorities with its uncompromising denunciation of slavery and colonization. Its circulation, even when limited, exposes a nightmare to the slaveholding imagination. Black thought can travel. Black anger can be articulated. Black readers and listeners can interpret their condition in moral, political, and even revolutionary terms. This realization does not create white fear from nothing. It sharpens a fear already living in the walls, so lawmakers and local officials respond in familiar fashion. They tighten restrictions on movement, assembly, preaching, reading, and printing grow more likely or more severe. Some rules are formal statutes, others are local practices intensified by rumour and enforcement. The effect is similar either way. More suspicion at ports, more pressure on black churches, more scrutiny of passes and papers, more demand that white supervision extend into every corner of black life. A society that claims confidence in its institutions behaves instead like a man checking the same lock 3 times before bed. You notice the atmosphere in a southern courthouse, boots on floorboards, ink drying on forms, the smell of old paper, dust, sweat, and damp wool. A sheriff speaks in clipped tones to a clerk. A magistrate signs something without much expression. Outside, wagons rattle past and dogs bark in the yard. The machinery of local power does not look especially dramatic. That is part of its danger. It is routine. Laws are passed, notices posted, patrols organised, permits checked, taxes collected, and people categorised. A harder era can arrive by ordinary office work. For black Americans, these tightening controls do not erase community. In some ways, they deepen it. When pressure increases, networks become more precious. Churches matter more. Family ties matter more. Information matters more. A person who knows which road is unsafe, which town official is cruel, which employer pays honestly, which house can be trusted, which ship is due in port, which teacher will risk a lesson, becomes valuable in a way that no census line can capture. Community under pressure grows attentive. It remembers better. It whispers more carefully. It learns to notice what others miss. Free black communities in northern cities are especially important in this changing atmosphere. Though still denied equality and exposed to kidnapping, mob violence, exclusion, and insult, they are building institutions with real staying power. Churches gather not only worshippers but organisers. Schools train children who may become teachers, editors, ministers, tradesmen, and activists. Mutual aid societies care for widows, orphans, and the sick. Black newspapers and public speakers contest colonisation and demand citizenship. The work is uneven and often underfunded, but it is serious. The community is not waiting passively to be defined by hostile law. The growth matters because the nation itself is entering a more openly argued period over slavery, colonisation, and black citizenship. Colonisation schemes, which propose sending free black Americans to Africa, still attract white support in some circles. Many black Americans reject the idea firmly. They understand it as an insult disguised as philanthropy. America is the land of their birth, labour, kin, and dead. To suggest removal rather than justice is to admit that white society would rather export the problem than repent of its own conduct. Black opposition to colonisation becomes a vital expression of political clarity in this era. It says, with admirable plainness, "We belong here." You can imagine an evening meeting in a church basement or modest hall. Candles burn low, coats hang near the door, faces shine softly in the dim light. Someone rises to speak against colonisation, and heads nod before the sentence is even finished. The room smells of lamp oil, wet boots, wool, and paper. A child half asleep on a bench leans against an elder. Men and women listen with the alert stillness of people who know the subject touches the shape of their whole future. Political thought is not abstract in such a room. It is personal, immediate, almost bodily. Historians continue to debate how unified black political opinion was across regions and classes at this time, because communities faced different local pressures and did not all possess the same resources or platforms. Not every black American could attend meetings, read pamphlets, or publish arguments. Yet a broad pattern is clear. Many black communities, especially in the North, are developing a sophisticated critique of both slavery and the false benevolence of colonization. Their arguments rest on faith, citizenship, labor, memory, and moral logic. They understand the nation better than many of its self-appointed guardians do. In the South, the tightening of control produces another effect. It makes survival increasingly dependent on hidden skill. An enslaved preacher must judge every phrase, a literate person must weigh every scrap of paper, a family must decide whom to trust with news of a possible sale. A worker hired out in town must navigate wages, passes, and scrutiny at once. Life becomes more tactical. This does not mean people lose warmth or spontaneity. It means those qualities must live beside discipline. Joy becomes careful. Friendship becomes selective. Hope becomes strategic. A curious detail from the period lies in the way rumours themselves shape events. News often travels by voice, incomplete and altered, yet still powerful. A whispered account of a planned crackdown, a stricter patrol schedule, a suspicious stranger, a sale, a dangerous road, or a forthcoming law can change behaviour across a whole district. Historians cannot always verify every rumour that circulated. Of course, rumours leave poor archives, but they mattered because people acted on them. Fear and caution moved through communities like weather. Sometimes the rumour was false, sometimes it was not. Either way, the listening habits it produced were real. The larger national economy continues to press toward expansion, and with it the demand for enslaved labour remains strong. Cotton production rewards cruelty with profit. New lands in the Southwest invite plantation growth. The domestic slave trade continues to move people through chains of credit, speculation, inheritance, and sale. This is another reason the end of 1830 feels ominous. The system is not weakening from internal shame, it is rewarding its own worst instincts. A great many white fortunes still depend on not seeing black humanity too clearly, yet moral resistance also gathers. Black ministers preach dignity, black parents insist on education, black workers sustain households despite theft of wages and time. Free black leaders write and organize, enslaved people flee, negotiate, conceal, endure, and dream. White abolitionism exists too, though black Americans are often ahead of white allies in clarity, urgency, and willingness to name the crime plainly. The years just ahead will see more organized anti-slavery activism, more conflicts over speech and print, more sectional defensiveness, and more public struggle over slavery's future. Even if you do not know the details yet, the emotional pressure of the moment tells you that the quiet is unstable. Take a walk at dusk through a black neighbourhood in a northern city. Lamps appear one by one behind curtains. A church door closes after a meeting. The smell of soup, coal smoke, and damp brick fills the air. Somewhere a violin practices uncertainly. Somewhere children are still laughing when they ought to be settling down. A woman shakes crumbs from a cloth at her back step. A man returns home tired, shoulders dusted with the day's labour, but pauses to speak with a neighbour about some item from the newspaper. These are not grand scenes. They are everyday ones, but they carry a crucial truth. Community is being built in plain sight, even as danger sharpens around it. Now imagine a plantation quarter under the same darkening sky. Smoke curls from chimneys. The day's noise is thinned to lower voices. A baby fussing, the clink of a pot, a hymn line drifting out and fading. The ground still holds a little warmth from the sun. Someone mends a garment by the fire. Someone else sits unusually quiet, worried by news not yet confirmed. Here too, community persists. Food is shared. Warnings are passed. Hands are laid on shoulders. Children are drawn close. The era is hardening. But people are hardening too. Not into cruelty, but into resilience. There is a strange paradox in all of this. The more white society tries to enforce total control, the more it reveals its dependence on what it cannot fully control. It depends on black labour, black skill, black domestic management, black care work, black maritime knowledge, black agricultural expertise, black market exchange, black spiritual endurance, black child rearing, black loyalty to one another. It fears black communication because communication exists. It fears black reading because reading happens. It fears black faith because faith nourishes courage. Power often boasts of its own completeness just as the cracks begin to show. A slightly dry observation suggests itself here. White authorities spend an impressive amount of time insisting that black Americans are childlike, incapable, and dependent, while also constructing an enormous apparatus to monitor their movement, speech, reading, worship, labour, and meetings. One does wonder why such supposedly powerless people require so many patrols, statutes, warnings, and anxieties. The answer, of course, is that the stereotype is a lie and the authorities know it. Their behaviour gives them away. The future that opens from 1830 will not be gentle. Nat Turner's rebellion is only a year away, and its aftermath will provoke even harsher repression across much of the South. Abolitionism will grow louder. Southern defences of slavery will grow fiercer. Black institutions will continue building under strain. The road ahead will carry courage, backlash, eloquence, mourning, and conflict in unequal measure. You can feel the edge of that future already in the nervous energy of this year, even before the names of coming events are fully known to those living inside the moment. And still, as night deepens, life narrows down to human scale again. A mother braids a child's hair before bed. A father folds a worn coat over a chair. Someone checks that the door is fastened. Someone murmurs a prayer. A folded paper is touched once to be sure it remains where it should. In another house, a book is hidden away after a lesson. In another, a meeting note is tucked into a Bible. In another, a young person lies awake imagining a life with more room in it than the present allows. History often sounds grand from a distance. Up close, it breathed through rooms like these. So what does the close of 1830 reveal? It reveals a nation becoming harsher in the ways it handles black life. It reveals a white order increasingly committed to surveillance, restriction, and self-justification. It reveals a growing black determination to educate, worship, organise, care, and resist in response. It reveals that fewer freedoms do not erase the desire for freedom. They sharpen it. They teach people how much is at stake. The era ahead will ask terrible things of black Americans. It will also witness extraordinary endurance, intelligence, faith, and community from those forced to live within its narrowing terms. And now, as the hour grows late, let the sharper edges of the story soften a little. The voices of the day begin to recede. The courthouse is dark now. The market stalls are empty. The harbour ropes creak gently in the night wind. A candle burns low in a small room, then is pinched out. Somewhere, very softly, someone hums the last line of a hymn before sleep. Somewhere else, a child finally stops asking questions and drifts into dreams. The houses stand quiet under the same sky, whether built of brick, board, or log. Smoke thins upward, footsteps cease, the roads grow still. You let the details settle without clinging too tightly to them. The folded papers, the rough blankets, the church benches, the dusty roads, the whispered lessons, the market baskets, the careful prayers, they drift together now into a softer picture. Not because the history was gentle, but because the night is. You do not need to solve anything here. You only need to rest with the knowledge that even in a year of tighter control and fewer freedoms, human warmth remained. People kept caring for children, speaking names, sharing food, teaching songs, mending clothes, and holding faith close. Beneath the pressure of law and fear, ordinary love continued its quiet work. So the scene grows dimmer. The lantern light fades to amber, then to memory. The fields cool. The city hushes. The river keeps moving in darkness without asking anyone's permission. A final breeze stirs the leaves outside a cabin and brushes past a window in town. The long day loosens its grip. The voices are farther away now. The world of 1830, with all its strain and sorrow and endurance, settles slowly into silence. And in that silence, you can let your breathing slow, your thoughts grow light, and the story rest.